Yosemite National Park is one of the most beautiful places on Earth, and also one of the most mysterious. Over more than a century, hikers, travellers and park visitors have walked into its forests and mountains, never to return. Their stories are scattered through time, but they all share the same silence left behind by the wilderness. Joel Thomasin, 2021. When the morning sun touched the granite walls above Hetch Hetchy, a faint shimmer rolled across the still surface of the reservoir. It was the kind of quiet that makes a person's footsteps sound louder than they really are. In that silence, a 31-year-old Army reservist named Joel Thomasin began what should have been a simple 3-day trip. He left his home in Denair, California, and drove east toward Yosemite National Park. His plan was clear in his own notes and in what he told his family. He would start from the Hetch Hetchy trailhead, paddle his small red inflatable kayak, camp along the way, and spend some time fishing near Lake Elena. He was fit, methodical, and familiar with the outdoors. Everything about his preparation suggested control. He had a tan backpack, a hammock, a green sleeping bag, a yellow bear canister, and a wristwatch with GPS. On the afternoon of September the 6th, 2021, a ranger saw him crossing the road above the O'Shaughnessy Dam. The kayak was strapped to his gear. That was the last confirmed sighting of Joel Thomasin. His car remained parked neatly at the trailhead. His wilderness permit confirmed the dates of his trip. Each document formed a thin trail of paper breadcrumbs, clear, official, and meaningless without what should have come next. The terrain beyond that parking lot is a jigsaw of granite, forest, and water. Hetch Hetchy itself is a deep valley flooded by the damming of the Tuolumne River. To reach Lake Elena, a hiker must pass through steep switchbacks, thick pine groves, and narrow canyons where echoes replace real sound. Even the most experienced backpackers describe it as deceptive country. Distances that look short on a map can take hours of climbing and descending. Joel's route, if he followed the plan, would have taken him along the reservoir's northern edge, perhaps launching the kayak where the water narrows between the cliffs. He might have paddled east for a while before carrying the kayak overland toward Lake Elena. In early September, the air can shift quickly. Calm one moment, gusty the next. The reservoir sits in a bowl that traps wind and funnels it down narrow arms of water. A lightweight inflatable kayak can handle small ripples, but not long-running waves that build against the granite walls. When Joel didn't return on September 9th, his family notified park authorities. Search and rescue teams began the standard response. They checked his car, verified the permit, and began ground sweeps along the expected trail. Helicopters scanned the shoreline. Rangers used boats to trace the edges of the reservoir. Dog teams moved through forest near the dam. Nothing. No torn fabric, no paddle, no red kayak folded against a bank. The GPS watch that might have marked his path never transmitted again. Hetch Hetchy is both beautiful and unforgiving. The granite reflects sunlight so strongly that from the air it blinds searchers during midday. In the shade, under the firs, the ground is dark, cluttered with fallen branches and granite fragments. If someone leaves the trail and slips, even a few meters of elevation can hide them completely. The steep walls drop straight into the reservoir, and the water there is cold year-round. By the time the search expanded beyond the first week, rangers had mapped an enormous area of possible movement. They included the trails toward Lake Elena, Rancheria Falls, and parts of the wilderness toward Tiltil Valley. Still, nothing appeared. The family provided details of his equipment, hoping that a flash of red, tan, or green would stand out among the grey rock and yellowed grass. Nothing did. The National Park Service later listed his case among the open missing person investigations in Yosemite. What little could be verified remained the same. Last seen on September 6th, crossing the dam road with an inflatable kayak, presumed destination Lake Elena, no confirmed sighting afterward. From that point forward, speculation filled the gaps left by the terrain. Some rescuers suggested the kayak could have been caught by wind, drifting into the middle of the reservoir and overturning. If Joel had entered the water suddenly, the combination of shock, temperature, and equipment weight could have ended everything in minutes. Others thought he might have followed the shoreline on foot, searching for a better launch or fishing point, and slipped on wet granite near one of the feeder creeks. Each theory has its own geography. The reservoir has deep pockets and submerged logs that trap debris. If the kayak sank or deflated, it might never have surfaced. If he moved inland, dense vegetation could have concealed him from both ground and air. There are old burns and new growth areas that make even thermal imaging unreliable. Search teams returned periodically over the following months, focusing on likely drainages where rainwater might have carried objects downhill. The hope was that winter snowmelt could reveal something, a piece of gear, a fragment of bright fabric. None was ever found. The paper trail stands in contrast to the silence of the landscape. It shows a man who followed procedure, a registered vehicle, a recorded permit, planned dates, experienced background. The bureaucracy captured his entry into the park with precision and his exit with a blank. In reports and interviews, his family described him as disciplined, careful, and methodical, the sort of person who would secure every buckle and tie every strap. That detail makes his disappearance harder to fit into any tidy narrative. Equipment failure seems unlikely given his experience, yet without any evidence it cannot be ruled out. For the Park Service, Hetch Hetchy has always been a complicated search zone. Unlike the crowded Yosemite Valley, it receives fewer visitors, and its access road closes each evening. Once the gate is locked, the area grows completely still. Night brings sudden temperature drops and a darkness that absorbs flashlight beams. Sound travels strangely. A shout bounces from one wall to another, delayed and scattered. Imagine a lone hiker setting up a hammock as daylight fades. The red kayak deflated and packed beside him, the smell of pine sap in the air. The reservoir below glimmers with a trace of reflected moonlight. In such isolation, any small accident can escalate quickly. A twisted ankle, a slip near a drop, a sudden cramp while carrying gear. All it takes is distance and silence. Investigators looked at the digital traces he might have left. The GPS watch was never recovered, and no data uploaded from it after the day he vanished. His phone likely had no signal in the deep valley. Bank and card records showed no activity beyond the date of departure. Even his vehicle stayed locked, untouched, waiting in the same parking spot where he left it. By early winter, the official search scaled back. Snow began to fall on the higher ridges, and seasonal closures limited access. His family organised volunteer searches during the next spring thaw, hoping melting snow might expose a clue. Year after year, nothing surfaced. The terrain had done its work. The forest grows quickly, needles, bark and debris layer over every sign. The reservoir's water level changes with city demand, hiding and revealing shorelines at random. What may have been visible one week could be 15 feet underwater the next. The facts remain simple. A healthy 31-year-old man entered Yosemite's backcountry alone, fully equipped, and was never seen again. The red kayak that should have been easy to spot became a symbol of the case. An object that never reappeared, as if the valley itself swallowed it whole. For those who study disappearances in wilderness areas, Joel Thomason's case represents the modern face of an old pattern, the meeting point between preparation and unpredictability. It shows how even the best planned trip can dissolve when the landscape refuses to give anything back. In records and public notices, his name stands beside dozens of others still missing in Yosemite. Each entry is short, date, location, brief description, contact number, but behind those few lines lies a network of maps, search grids, and unanswered questions. The paper trail continues to exist, but it leads nowhere. If you visit Hetch Hetchy today, the dam still hums with the sound of water pushing towards San Francisco's aqueduct. The trails are open, the pines whisper above, and the air carries the same mountain stillness Joel would have felt. Somewhere beyond the road where he was last seen, the granite slopes rise and fall, and the reservoir laps quietly against them. It is easy to imagine how quickly the sound of footsteps can fade into that kind of silence. A silence that, since 2021, has never once given his family an answer. Sandra Johnson Hughes, 2020. There was a stillness in the forest around the Chiquito Pass trailhead as the July heat built through the low pines and granite ridges of the Sierra. On July 4th, 2020, 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes was last seen stepping away from her vehicle, leaving behind a scene that raised far more questions than answers. Sandra had come to California from Hawaii earlier that summer. She sought solitude in the Sierra National Forest, south of the boundary of Yosemite National Park. Her friends remembered her as someone who was comfortable in the outdoors, self-sufficient and experienced. Then the record abruptly falters. On July 4th, she was observed near the Chiquito Pass trailhead in Madera County. Her vehicle was discovered shortly afterward, crashed into a tree or into a ravine, not far from her campsite but with clear signs of oddness. The campsite itself was found in disarray, equipment tossed about, personal belongings scattered, an arrangement unlike how Sandra had camped before. That same day or the next, a sleeping bag matching her recent purchase was found about 2.5 miles north of the crash site, just inside Yosemite's border. These are the hard points of the timeline and the evidence. Let's step back to the timeline. June 26th, the last time her family heard from her. She told them she would spend time in the wilderness, perhaps near Johnson's Meadow and the Sierra Fringes. Early July, she drives to the Chiquito Pass area. July 4th, the day she disappears. Somewhere between her parked car and the nearby forest, a change happens. Her vehicle is found crashed, her gear left behind. Then the sleeping bag shows up further north, inside Yosemite's boundary, a ghost breadcrumb in a widening mystery. Search teams from the Madera County Sheriff's Office and the National Park Service scoured the area. They followed her car's route, checked the campsite, searched along ridgelines and forest roads. But the further evidence remained thin. The sleeping bag is perhaps the most tangible clue. Alone, stripped of the rest of her gear, found off-trail deep in a zone where forest growth and shadows hide footprints quickly. No backpack, no tent, no body, just that bag. And so the narrative splits into two parallel threads. One, the known route, vehicle, trailhead, campsite, and the other, the unknown shadows, what happened after she left the cleared site. At the crash site, investigators noted the car had apparently left the road into Chiquito Creek Ravine area. The speed seemed low, suggesting a possible emergency exit rather than reckless driving. Did Sandra leave the vehicle under her own power? Did she intend to seek help? Witnesses later reported a woman matching her description along Forest Road 5 S01 in August, roughly 5 weeks later. 2 hunters saw her leaning against a tree wearing overalls and a floral shirt, appearing thinner. She did not approach them. That sighting remains unconfirmed but introduces a haunting possibility. Let's shift attention to the echoes of the evidence. The deranged campsite, gear scattered, tents abandoned, the smell of disruption in a place that should have been calm. That suggests the departure was abrupt. The car crash adds another layer. It might mark the moment of escape or disorientation. The sleeping bag inside Yosemite's border suggests she moved northwards, or something moved it. Perhaps she dragged it. Perhaps it was carried by water or wildlife, or moved by someone else entirely. But its location is certain, just inside Yosemite. That means the zone of search crosses jurisdictional lines, and the dense terrain of that border zone complicates tracking. What did those hunters see on August 9th? A woman in the woods, matching her build, thin, leaning, passive. If it was Sandra, she'd already been missing over a month. What condition would she have been in? No gear, no visible pack. In the late summer heat of the Sierra, without equipment, vulnerable to dehydration, heat stress or injury. The terrain offers many hazards, steep slopes, dry creek beds, ridgelines where one misstep can lead to serious injury. The forest conceals as much as it reveals. It's worth tracing the landscape. The Chiquito Pass trailhead corridor is rocky, forested with firs and pines, intersected by old seasonal creeks and ridges that drop away quickly. Once past the trailhead, off-trail travel means no blazed path, no footprints to follow easily. Searching that zone is hard work. Dense ground cover, fallen logs, granite outcroppings, and constant shadows. If Sandra left the beaten path, searchers may have been looking in the wrong zones. The sleeping bag's discovery northwards hints at movement, or at least relocation, into Yosemite's domain, where access is still possible but less trafficked. Walking through Sandra's likely mindset, she sets up camp near Chiquito. Perhaps she went for a walk that day, returned to find something wrong with the vehicle or site. A crash occurs. She refuses help from passing motorists. Why? Did she feel able to manage, or was there an injury, disorientation, or other motive? Then she walks away, barefoot or poorly shod, leaving behind nearly everything. The only recovered item, a sleeping bag, dropped or carried northwards. No footprints reliably traced beyond that. Weeks pass. The search coverage moves outward, but the forest regenerates signs quickly. Rain, falling leaves, animal tracks, they all scrub evidence. Echoes of human presence linger. The clothes, the sleeping bag, the crashed car. All speak but do not answer. They mark a transition from planned recreation to something unplanned and unresolved. That the sleeping bag appears inside Yosemite elevates the mystery. Did she cross the boundary alone? Did she enter the park intentionally or by mistake? Did her route take her into territory with fewer visitors, fewer campsites, fewer signs of human movement? And if so, where? Search efforts continue. The official missing people page for Yosemite lists Sandra Johnson Hughes, with an appeal for anyone travelling in the area south of Merced Pass and Buena Vista Crest during July 2020 to report any abandoned gear. That referral underscores the gap, not just the missing person, but missing gear, missing narrative, missing route. Her family's pain is quiet but present. They know the dates, the vehicle details, the gear list, the campsite location. They do not know the footprints that led out of that scene, or the moment when she became untraceable. For viewers, the case invites a question. How does one disappear in terrain that is theoretically mapped, tracked, watched? It takes only one wrong turn, one slip, one moment of solitude in a place that does not echo your voice back. Walking the forest now near Chiquito Pass, you can imagine the quiet. A hiking boot scuffs fallen pine needles and disappears into shadows. A path less travelled splits into faint game trails. Summer light filters through trees into glades where the sleeping bag was found. The disturbed campsite remains unseen except by satellite or plane. The crashed car was removed, but the scar on the land stays. The unknown corridor where Sandra may have passed remains unmarked, untracked. In this chapter of our documentary, we cross-cut the known and unknown, the vehicle crash, the scattered gear, the sleeping bag's relocation into Yosemite, the possible sighting. Each thread intertwines but fails to tie off. The echoes linger in the evidence, the terrain hides the remainder. The trail of Sandra Johnson Hughes winds off into the forest with no visible end. Peter Jackson, 2016. Early morning light filtered through the tall pines of White Wolf Campground, scattering gold across the picnic tables and metal bear boxes. In one of the sites sat a neatly arranged tent, a small stove, and a parked car belonging to Peter Fancher Jackson. He was 74, fit and experienced in the outdoors. His plan was simple, a day hike from his campsite before returning for the evening. The date was September 17th, 2016. At some point after sunrise, he shouldered his blue day pack and walked away from the campground. That was the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw him. The paper trail begins in perfect order. His campsite was registered and paid for through September 21st. His vehicle remained in the same parking spot, locked and untouched. Park rangers later confirmed that everything at his site appeared calm, no sign of struggle, no disorder. The only thing missing was him and the royal blue outdoor products day pack he carried. Peter was not a novice. Friends and family described him as healthy and meticulous, someone who liked hiking alone but always planned carefully. Before leaving home, he had sent a short text to his son, "On my way to Yosemite." That was the final message. When he didn't return by his reservation's end, a ranger checked the campsite. The car was still there, the gear undisturbed. A search began immediately. The area around White Wolf is high country, granite ridges, dense forest, and meadows threaded by narrow creeks. The trail network radiates in all directions. Lucan's Lake to the west, Hardin Lake to the north, Tioga Road looping south. Dozens of day hike possibilities start here, each one a few hours long if you stay on the path, and endless if you step off it. Rangers organized search teams, helicopters, dogs and volunteers. They worked grid after grid, starting close to camp and expanding outward. But there were no footprints, no scraps of clothing, no dropped item that could narrow the search. Even with aerial sweeps, nothing stood out against the pale granite and dark forest floor. The forest is efficient at erasing. Wind scatters pine needles, rain washes small impressions from dust, animals shift debris. After a few days, even clear tracks fade. As weeks passed, the file thickened with reports but no progress. The paper trail continued, logs of every flight path, every dog unit, every ranger's observation. The records charted human effort, but the wilderness returned no evidence. Then, almost 3 years later, in August 2019, something changed. A backpack was discovered between Aspen Valley and Smith Peak, about 10 miles from White Wolf as the crow flies. Its colour, brand and wear pattern matched the description of Peter Jackson's day pack. Inside were decayed contents, fabric remnants, corroded metal from tools, and personal items consistent with his gear. The finding ignited the echoes of evidence. Why there? The area lies on Yosemite's western slope, remote but accessible by old forest roads. It's not a common route for someone taking a short walk from White Wolf. To reach that ridge, he would have needed to cross canyons and navigate rough ground. It suggested he had travelled far, far beyond what a normal day hike would require. Investigators revisited the 2016 maps. Could he have mistaken a trail junction, followed a drainage instead of a path? Or had he planned to explore off-trail from the start? The answers were as thin as the mountain air. From a ranger's point of view, the find helped and hurt in equal measure. It confirmed that Peter had indeed left the campground and ventured deep into backcountry terrain. But it gave no clue to what happened after the pack came to rest. No remains were found, no additional items, no trace that could define direction or cause. The backpack stood alone, a silent witness to his last movements. Between White Wolf and Aspen Valley, the land folds into a patchwork of forest and granite ribs. Trails narrow and vanish. Small creeks cut sudden ravines. A wrong turn can easily lead a hiker downhill toward drainage lines that seem like paths but soon turn into impassable cliffs or brush walls. Climbing back up requires stamina, and at 74, even a minor injury could become decisive. The timeline reconstructed by searchers stretches thin. September 17th, he texts his son and arrives at Yosemite. September 18th to 21, campsite remains untouched, no sightings reported. September 22nd onward, search efforts begin. August 2019, pack recovered near Smith Peak. Everything in between is blank. The echoes that remain, the pack, the still campsite, the car, the reservation slips, are like snapshots of a story paused mid-sentence. Each one proves he was there. None explains where he went. Imagine the moment he left the campground. The sun barely above the trees, the air cold, the smell of sap and granite dust. He follows a path, maybe toward Hardin Lake, maybe just wandering. A junction appears. Trails here can be subtle, faint in the forest. One small decision, a turn left instead of right, changes the geography entirely. Hours later, the shadows lengthen. Maybe he keeps walking, sure that the road is just ahead. The terrain folds again, another ridge, another valley, until the map in his head no longer matches what he sees. The pack could have been set down for rest, for a meal, or because of exhaustion. It could have rolled downhill or been carried by runoff during storms. Its position between Aspen Valley and Smith Peak doesn't reveal intent, only direction. And that direction leads deeper into wilderness. Rangers revisited the area after the pack was found. They combed the ridges with renewed focus, searching every drainage and outcrop within a mile radius. No further evidence surfaced. The forest offered nothing more. Even today, the file remains open. The campsite records still list his name. His vehicle was eventually released to his family, but the case stayed active within Yosemite's search and rescue database. In the sequence of disappearances across Yosemite, Peter Jackson's stands out for its neat beginning and its single echo years later. A perfect record of entry, and one object returned by the land long after the man himself was gone. The scene where his pack was discovered looks ordinary. Pine needles, lichen-covered boulders, a slope falling away toward the valley below. To the untrained eye, nothing remarkable. But somewhere in that silence lies the gap between the paper trail and the evidence, the space where his footsteps stopped recording. George Penker, 2011. A group of about 20 church members set out into the valley on a bright June morning. Among them was 30-year-old George Penker, visiting Yosemite National Park in California for what was meant to be a regular day hike. The trailhead lay at the base of the famous waterfall, the steep climb known as the trail to the top of Upper Yosemite Falls. The route rose nearly 2,400 feet above the valley floor, switchback after switchback, granite slabs, loose rock and exposed ridgelines. The group commenced moving upward together. By approximately 2:40 p.m. on June 17, 2011, they arrived at the top of Upper Yosemite Falls. George, described as about 5'10" and 240 pounds, with dark brown hair and blue eyes, had climbed with the group. He carried a small blue cloth bag and some limited food and water. He was wearing grey sweatpants with a white stripe and a black shirt or tank top. At the summit, the party paused, took in the view, then agreed to return at their own pace and rendezvous at the bottom near Yosemite Lodge. After the group left the summit, George was never seen again. he did not arrive at the bottom. When the group reached the valley floor and counted heads, his absence was noted around 9 p.m. that same day. They assumed perhaps he'd walked ahead, but the assumption proved tragically incorrect. From that trailhead, the path down, or any attempted shortcut or deviation, could lead into difficult terrain. The Upper Yosemite Falls Trail is well maintained, but nearly half its length is above treeline, exposed and steep. One misstep can mean descent into a side canyon or onto granite slopes where tracks vanish. After the group departed, George's route, intentions and whereabouts instantly became unknown. Rescue teams swung into action. Overnight, rangers and search and rescue personnel moved into the field. By the next morning, a full-scale operation was underway. Helicopters, ground crews, K9 units, search dogs with GPS trackers. The National Park Service put out an alert that a missing hiker was last seen at the top of Upper Yosemite Falls Trail. The search covered the trail corridor, side drainages, ridges above and below the trail and the steep walls of Yosemite Valley. Yet, despite a well-known trail and a heavy search deployment, after days of effort there was no physical evidence. No footprints, no backpack, no discarded clothing, no sign whatsoever of George. The terrain hindered detection. Granite slabs are deceptively smooth. Forest litter, pine needles and fallen branches quickly obscure tracks. Helicopter views of dense forest canopy produce little detail. Side gullies and talus fields invite glimpses of movement. But once someone is off the official trail, vanished becomes plausible. The summit time of 2:40 p.m. matters. After that point, the daylight hours began to soften, a person moving slower than anticipated risks running into fading light, cooler temperatures, and rescuers losing daylight access. If George separated from the maintained trail, either willingly or by accident, the route back may have been non-linear. Small side paths, game trails, or drainage gullies could appear to lead downhill, but in Yosemite's valley context, downhill sometimes leads into impassable terrain or into the Merced River Canyon. Search logs show that by June 23rd, the operation transitioned from full active search to continuous limited mode, meaning the probability of immediate survival or retrieval was considered low. Equipment, trail maps, and search grid efforts remained active, but the original energy of response diminished. Over the years, no major leads have emerged. George remains listed by the Department of Justice's Missing Persons page and by the National Park Service's cold case listings. What the land itself suggests, the area above Yosemite Valley is granite and forest in equal parts. As one ascends, the trees thin, exposure increases. If George left the trail, he may have entered a drainage that seemed gentle but ended in dense forest below. Once off the marked route, rescue dogs lose scent, aerial assets cannot penetrate canopy, and time works in favour of the wilderness. Weather is rarely extreme in June, but even light rain, wind, or falling pine needles can erase tracks in hours. Visitors note that the Yosemite Falls Trail is popular and well maintained, but still demanding. The National Park Service warns that hikers should not stray off the maintained path due to steep drops adjacent to the trail. The top half is steep, rocky, and strenuous. Separation from a group, especially an inexperienced hiker or one under fatigue, can escalate risk quickly. George was not primarily a hiker. He wasn't described as an avid outdoorsman, more of a participant in a church group outing. That adds a dimension of possibility, an unexpected separation, a misjudgment of trail junctions, a moment of intentional advance or simple wandering observation could open the way into a hidden path. The last confirmed sighting was at the summit. After that, all we have is absence. No gear has been reported recovered to date, no personal items, no trace of him beyond the fact of his disappearance. With no backpack, no clothing, no water bottle left behind, the case becomes one of pure terrain and unlimited possibilities. The moment he moved away from the group, the search area multiplied. In the story of Yosemite's unsolved disappearances, the case of George Penker stands out for the shocking fact. He went missing on a busy route, among many hikers, and still no definitive trace remains. The trailhead was known, the summit visited, the return agreed upon, then nothing. As we leave this chapter, imagine yourself stepping from the marked trail at the summit, the valley spread wide, the sound of the falls far below, and one foot turned onto a faint side route. That moment could be the difference between visible and vanished. George's footsteps after the summit remain unrecorded. Michael Fissery, 2005. A man who knew the mountains returned to one of his favourite corners. On the morning of June 15, 2005, 51-year-old Michael Allen Fisery entered the backcountry of Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park, California. He had backpacking experience, he knew at least parts of the terrain, and he carried his permit for a loop hike through the Tiltil Valley region. The plan was clear, what unfolded is not. Let's start with what we do know. Michael's permit authorised travel in the backcountry near the north end of Hetch Hetchy. His vehicle remained at the lot near the ranger station. His name was added to the park's missing person roster when he failed to return, and the official cold cases list records his vanishing on June 21, 2005. Investigators list his height as about 5'10", weight 165 pounds, grey shoulder-length hair, grey beard and moustache, glasses. The park's remote terrain was familiar to him, but familiarity does not guarantee safety. Now let's cut into the terrain. The Tiltil Valley area sits northeast of the reservoir, framed by steep ridgelines, granite outcrops, dense forest, and high ridges that often remain snow-covered well into summer. Trails here are less travelled, signage may fade, and once off the path the wilderness takes over. If Michael deviated from his planned route, or if weather changed, the land itself becomes a labyrinth rather than a map. Here is how the timeline and search efforts cross-cut each other. June 15th, Michael departs Hetch Hetchy trailhead with backcountry permit, headed toward Tiltil Valley and possibly aiming toward the Ridge or the Pacific Crest Trail corridor. Sometime between June 15th and June 19th, he fails to return by his permit's end, prompting concern. His family waits. June 19th, his permit expires with no sign of his return. June 21st, search officially launched by the park. Rescue teams pour into the area. Ground crews, canine units, aircraft, mapping of drainages and ridgelines begin. During search operations, searchers find his backpack near the base of Tiltil Mountain, just off trail, in extremely rugged and hazardous terrain. The backpack is missing his water bottle and camera, items he normally carried. No footprints lead away, no gear dumped in visible campsites, no confirmed sighting of him. After initial weeks, search efforts taper into continuous monitor mode because no further clues emerge. Between the layers of timeline and terrain lies what we might call the search pattern. The creatures of the forest, pine needles, fallen branches, brush, seasonal snowmelt erase tracks quickly. The pack found near the snowline suggests he travelled higher than his official route or diverted into a drainage unspecified. That pack becomes both clue and cipher. It says, he got here. But then, nothing. Imagine the moment. Michael steps away from the shaded trail through pines, climbs toward a ridgeline overlooking the valley, his pack loaded. He moves into thinner forest, granite bedrock underfoot, perhaps snow patches still lingering at higher elevation. One slip, one misjudged step on wet granite, and the circle of safe return narrows. The ridgelines are sharp, elevation drops sudden, side gullies can turn into walls. In this terrain, a detour is easy, a rescue hard. Searchers grid the known trail until it fades. They fly overhead, but the canopy hides more than it reveals. They send dogs, but scent trails evaporate with heat and wind. They mark the backpack location, but no body, no tent, no dropped clothing. One key item missing, his water bottle and camera, items most hikers would not abandon. Why they were gone suggests a moment of emergency or departure, perhaps from injury, perhaps from nature, perhaps from choice. We cannot say. Weather matters too. Late June in that section of Yosemite means possible afternoon thunderstorms, sudden cold at high elevation, icy meltwater flowing fast. A hiker off trail may underestimate the speed of swollen creek or overestimate the ease of an uphill climb. The terrain does not wait. It does not pause until you are ready. During the search, the calendar clicks. 1 week, 2 weeks, month. Time stretches. The vehicle remains parked, the permit logged. The terrain still holds its silence. The footpaths remain empty. The gear remains untouched aside from the backpack. Friends and family remain hopeful, but the wilderness remains indifferent. The search map eventually shows a large target zone radiating from the pack's location. The environment there, steep talus slopes, granite ridges above timberline, forested bowls that funnel water and hide sound. The pack location indicates a northeast corridor rather than the more common south loop approach his permit might have indicated. That suggests either a route change or some event forced a deviation. but lack of further evidence means the change remains unseen. In that region, once a hiker moves away from maintained trail, there are few markers. Creek crossings may be washed out. Game trails may look inviting but end abruptly. Rocks shift, undercut ledges hide voids, snow lingers. For a hiker alone, an injury or a false turn can quickly become life-threatening. The land allows this. As the season turned into summer, as foliage grew heavier, searchers reported diminishing visibility and fewer clues. The backpack may have been found early, but by then it may have been days or weeks old. Tracks gone, the forest grows, the terrain closes over. Michael's story remains unresolved. The official record lists his disappearance in the Tiltil Valley Hetchy backcountry. The search remains open, the only tangible item his backpack in rugged terrain outside his planned trail corridor. Time moves on, the forest remains. If you walk into the Tiltil Ridges today, you might pass snowmelt patches, granite slabs scraped by glacial action, silent ridges that drop into unseen basins. You might see nothing unusual, but the absence of a path is the same as a path in this context. Here, a man can arrive and vanish. The landscape swallows tracks. His presence leaves only one pack behind, Stacey Ann Arras, 1981. The high alpine air of the Sierra that July day carried a crisp undertone of change. Sunlight gleaming off granite, a gentle breeze whispering through fir boughs. 14-year-old Stacey Arras had come to the mountains of the park with her father and a small group, part of a horsepacking trip up from Tuolumne Meadows to cabins at the foothills of high ridges. The place, the area near Sunrise High Sierra Camp, approximately 9,400 feet above sea level. Earlier that afternoon the group arrived. The horses were tied, the guests cleaned up in their rustic cabin, the air grew thinner. Stacey showered, changed out of the saddle clothes, and slipped into hiking boots. Her father had insisted she switch out of sandals before venturing any distance beyond the camp. She carried a small camera. She said she wanted to go take photographs of the lake. She told him, "I'll be back in a few minutes." That walk held the last confirmed moment of her presence. A cabin at the Sunrise Camp, a trail that descends perhaps a mile or so toward the adjacent Sunrise Lakes. The camp itself housed 9 cabins, and the setting was gorgeous. Alpine meadow, ridges towering above, a path gently winding toward the lakes. Yet within minutes Stacey stepped into the landscape, and the landscape closed behind her. From the trailhead moment to that last sighting, the trailhead lay near the camp, accessed via horse ride from Tuolumne. At 3 p.m. the group arrived at the cabins. Soon after, Stacey and a 70-something-year-old man from the group set off together toward the lake. The man, reportedly aged 71 or 77 in differing sources, paused. He grew tired, sat down on a boulder about 50 or 100 yards off trail. Observers near the corrals saw Stacey walk off a short distance from him, over granite slabs toward a tree line. That was the last confirmed sighting. She never returned to the group. Let's pause on the terrain. The route from Sunrise Camp to Lower Sunrise Lakes descends through granite bedrock, boulder fields, meadow patches, forested slope, and then to a lake basin. The elevation change isn't extreme, but the surface is rough. Large granite slabs can be slick. Forest ground cover hides voids. Once a hiker steps off the blazed path, the land offers faint game trails or no trail at all. After the man sat down, Stacey proceeded alone into that zone where footprints vanish and rocks shift. Search and rescue responded quickly. The official document from the park lists the date missing as July 17, 1981. The operation involved hundreds of people: park rangers, mountain rescue volunteers, canine units, helicopters, grid searches over a roughly 3 to 5 square mile area around the trail towards Sunrise Lakes. Yet only one piece of evidence surfaced: the lens cap to her camera. No body, no camera, no shoes, no backpack or coat found. The only recovered item sat inside the tree line near the lake. Let's cut between terrain and timeline. 3 p.m, group arrival at camp, 3:30 to 4 p.m. Stacey changes her shoes, 4:10 to 4:30 p.m. She sets off with the older man toward the lakes. 4:20 p.m, man sits on boulder. 4:25 to 4:30 p.m, Stacey departs downward toward the lake. Shortly after, the guide at the corral looks up and sees her standing on a rock about 50 yards south of the trail. This is the last human-verified sighting. Evening arrives. Search teams mobilize. July 27th, August. Searches continue but yield no trace. 11 days in, the official active search is scaled back due to lack of findings. The echoes of evidence, the lens cap. It lies in that zone between granite slabs and forest edge. It indicates that Stacy passed through that spot. But what happened next? How did a healthy young girl vanish in terrain that had fellow hikers just minutes before? The terrain gives possible paths, rocks that slope into hidden crevices, forest covers that hide a fall, meadow edges where one can slip, boulder fields that disrupt movement. At 9,400 feet altitude, the temperature can drop. Darkness falls quicker, forest floor becomes uneven, wind gusts around ridges can disorient. A misstep into a shallow stream could spring a twist. A fall off granite might incapacitate. A veering off trail could carry a hiker into brush where visibility is minimal. All real evidence, though, stops at the lens cap. No camera, no film, no other items. The hike out never happened. The group counted heads after their meal and found Stacy missing. They alerted park authorities. The park's case file runs thousands of pages. Portions remain not publicly released. Investigators note the only known item found is the lens cap. The search zone was rigorously grid searched, yet no sign of her body or gear emerged. The terrain is unforgiving in that sense. At high elevation, the forest cover hides much. Granite slabs reflect light, confuse aerial views. Narrow ridges and gullies direct water and debris in unpredictable ways. If one slipped or wandered, the land may have carried trace items downslope or out of sight. Wildlife may have scattered smaller items. Rain, wind, snowfall over years erase even larger clues. The cabin-to-lake route is one that looks simple on a map, but beneath the surface the land is deceptive. In this story, the last sighting is a rock ledge, the group behind, the forest ahead. A teenage girl with camera in hand stepping into the unknown for a few minutes, so she thought, never to return. Her disappearance remains open. The only physical trace, a lens cap found just inside treeline. The paper trail, the trip, the booking of the horse ride, the cabins, the group list, anchors her in place and time. The terrain and the echoes raise the questions. Why did she walk off? Did she veer off trail to capture a photograph? Did a slip, fall, loss of footing, or disorientation take her from view? Did she wander into a drainage? In that forest and granite mix, the land yields few clues. As you listen to this chapter, picture the cabin, the high meadow, the hammer-struck granite turning pink at dusk. See Stacy step away, small camera in hand, toward the tree-lined lake. Hear the forest creak, feel the drop beneath your footing. Know that in those few minutes the landscape changed from populated route to hidden wilderness. And the only echo in 3 decades remains a lens cap lying silent in the woods. Walter H. Reinhard, 2002. In the crisp morning air of late September 2002, 66-year-old Walter H. Reinhard from Oro Valley, Arizona, parked his car at the White Wolf Trailhead east of Yosemite Valley. He was a retired Marine, strong and experienced, noted for hiking alone and frequently. His car bore no troubling signs, the parking sticker in place, the key left securely, the permit recorded, the wilderness ahead wide open. This is where the paper trail begins. Walter was logged as missing since approximately September 19, 2002. On or about that date, he's believed to have stepped onto a trail from the White Wolf area. On September 30th, his vehicle was found at the trailhead. Car intact, belongings inside, no sign of struggle, no note. Park rangers reported that his credit cards had not been used, no phone calls placed, and no sightings reported in the interim. His profile: white male, 5'8" tall, about 145 pounds, greying brown hair, clean-shaven. He was known to wear a grey felt alpine hat and hiking boots, and often carried a large fanny pack. The paperwork lists his case under missing person, Yosemite National Park, date missing, September 30th, 2002, though the actual departure is likely earlier. But the paper trail offers little in terms of movement. There's no permit for a backcountry trip, no companion listed, no planned exit date. The only concrete facts are vehicle parked at White Wolf, trailhead departure presumed, and then silence. The land beyond that trailhead becomes the domain of search and terrain, where humans are less effective and the wilderness more absolute. Now we turn to the search and terrain. White Wolf lies in the High Sierra, accessed by a rough road that ends at the trailhead. From there, trails lead into forest, granite ridges and ridgelines. toward lesser used areas like Lucan's Lake, Harden Lake and remote ridges. The terrain around White Wolf is remote, with steep slopes, occasional snow patches late in season, and drainage gullies that divert unseen paths. If someone hiking alone deviated from the main trail, the land could absorb them without trace. Search teams mobilized soon after his car was found. Helicopters scanned ridges, ground crews followed trails, canine units probed forest edges, and volunteers walked drainage lines and ridge lines. One news article described the search. Park rangers found his car parked benignly at the White Wolf trailhead. They searched long and hard with helicopters and bloodhounds, boats and a big crew of park employees. Not a sign has turned up. The wilderness had swallowed him. The terrain complicates matters. On trails near White Wolf, the forest is thick at first. Pine and fir, ground cover of needles and fallen branches. Then one climbs or moves into granite slabs that reflect sun and echo footsteps. Watercourses cross the area, and fallen trees, tailor slopes, rock fields can hide tracks. Once off the main trail, even a strong hiker may struggle to find footing or orientation. Bearings shift, ridgelines look alike, daylight shortens in late September, campsites fewer, and the remoteness intensifies. The vehicle at the trailhead suggests Walter intended a hike, perhaps day hike, though his physical form might have allowed longer travel. But with no specific plan recorded, no gear inventory known publicly, and no further sightings, the search area multiplied. The map shows numerous potential destinations: Lucan's Lake area, Coyote Valley, the ridges toward the Tuolumne River Gorge. Each adds kilometers of wilderness. Each increases odds of losing track. In the months after his disappearance, search efforts remained large for the first 3 weeks, then gradually scaled back into continuous monitoring mode. Terrain that could not be safe for search crews, steep cliffs, unstable slopes, dense forest, remained unsearched. The official missing person record still lists his case as open. The absence of gear found, no backpack, clothing, water bottle, even campsite left behind, makes this case particularly puzzling. Putting together paper trail and terrain, we know the starting point, White Wolf trailhead. We know the endpoint unknown. The trail likely began with promise and structure. Car parked, boots laced, hat pulled down. But once he entered the forest, the pathways diverged. Did he follow an established trail? Or did he head toward a scenic ridge and leave the trail? Did an injury stop him? Did weather turn? Late September in Yosemite can bring snow or ice at higher elevation. A fall on granite could be fatal or immobilizing. If he became incapacitated and could not call for help, his presence quietly came to rest in a slope or a drainage where searchers would not easily find him. As an experienced hiker, Walter would have known the risks. But as with many wilderness disappearances, experience without companion still leaves vulnerability. His last known act, the car parked, the trailhead begun, sets the stage. What comes next is blank. The land holds the secret. The searchers probe the ridges, the gullies, the unmarked slabs, but the forest remains efficient at erasing tracks. Needles cover footsteps. Rain and wind blur scent. Rocky ground hides footprints forever. Trails that appear go nowhere. All the while, the paper trail remains fixed. Missing since late September. Vehicle found at trailhead, no contact. If you picture the route from White Wolf, you see dirt road ending near historic cabins, then trail climbing through forest toward granite outcrops. The air changes at elevation. The forest thins, sky opens. One can look down into valleys but not easily spot a body beneath the trees. Sound is swallowed by rock. Footprints disappear into gravel. The difference between main trail and side drainage is subtle. For someone hiking alone, one wrong turn or slip might lead into a corridor where no one ever passes again. Voices of the search crews recorded frustration. One article noted that the sons of Walter were searching daily, believing that their father's rigorous fitness made him a strong hiker. But even so, they admitted the probability of finding him alive grew smaller with each passing day. They examined every possible trail, consulted maps, and still nothing emerged. This case stands as a stark illustration of wilderness power, a man fully capable with motivation at a known trailhead, yet vanished. The paper trail gives us the beginning. The terrain gives us the context where disappearance is plausible and search exceptionally hard. The search efforts are substantial, but the land is larger and quieter. Footsteps fade, the forest recovers, time stretches, and Walter Reinhard remains missing. Ruth Ann Ruppert, 2000. A light summer breeze drifted through the pines of the Yosemite Valley on August 14, 2000, when 49-year-old Ruth Ann Ruppert walked out of the comfort of a medical clinic and into the wild. She had just been treated for an eye infection at the Yosemite Medical Clinic near Curry Village. Less than an hour later, she vanished into the backcountry of the park. Her plan had been straightforward. She was scheduled to join a longer backpacking trip, but the infection forced her to postpone. Instead, she told contacts she would take a shorter hike that afternoon, perhaps from Yosemite Falls toward the Foresta area. She was registered in the park, recorded at the clinic, seen that morning in the valley. Everything marked the start of a typical hike. Then nothing. The first echo appeared 8 years later. In 2008, searchers found a backpack belonging to Ruth Ann in the drainage of Fireplace Creek. This creek lies along the corridor between Yosemite Falls and Foresta, a plausible route if someone had attempted a day hike out of the valley rim. The backpack was intact but empty. No other gear, no other personal item, just the bag. The evidence raises more questions than answers. Why did the hike deviate, or did it? The drainage where the backpack was found descends into steep, less visited terrain. The canyon walls rise and converge. Creeks narrow, forest grows dense. If Ruth Ann left the main path or declined to turn back when daylight faded, she could easily move into terrain that neither search dogs nor helicopters could penetrate easily. Forest canopy shields falling debris, granite ridges reflect sound away, footprints wash away overnight, the land erases itself. The echoes from that afternoon, the clinic appointment, the change of plans, the last known location near the valley floor, the hiking intention, the evidence, the backpack found in 2008, placed in a drainage zone consistent with her presumed route. The gap is the human motion between those points. What exactly happened in those minutes remains unknown. Investigators noted that Ruth Ann had a prosthetic eye, and that the infection in her remaining eye may have affected her vision at the time she set off. In terrain with shifting granite slabs, narrow trails, low visibility could be a factor. Forest slopes that look innocuous by day can become hazards when light fades, when fatigue sets in, when a hiker is alone and slightly impaired. That day in Yosemite Valley, after treatment, Ruth Ann walked away from the clinic area. A witness later reported seeing her hike a trail toward Yosemite Falls and the ridge above. She carried a day pack, had boots and seemed ready, but somewhere along the route, something changed. The trail toward Foresta steeps, crosses ridges, enters forested draws. Her backpack's later location implies movement into the side channels of Fireplace Creek, an area of rockfall, broken ground and limited direct access. Search teams after her disappearance covered the valley rim, the trail corridors, the standard routes between Yosemite Falls and Foresta. They used dogs, grid searches, helicopters, but found nothing else. The fact that the backpack wasn't found earlier suggests either its location was out of the search grid or the forest concealed it. The forest here is dense. Fallen fir needles, pine boughs, rocky rubble make tracking difficult. Streams swallow prints, granite slabs shed footsteps. Over time, the forest recovers every sign. The backpack becomes a silent testimony, a marker of presence, a hint of route but not proof of destination. The rest of her gear, her body, any trace of her movement, none surfaced. The echo of her departure remains, a clinic visit, a change of plan, a decision to go, the evidence of what remains behind, a backpack in drainage years later. The biggest question, what happened in the middle? In the months that followed, Search and Rescue archived the case but kept it open. The park's cold case list records her disappearance on August 14, 2000, with last known location near the Curry Village Clinic. No new leads emerged. The case file shows her backpack found in Fireplace Creek drainage in 2008. It shows the trail corridor and the probable route. But it does not show the moment or the cause. Walking today in that part of Yosemite, along the slope where rocks glint and forest shadows deepen, you might see a discarded tent site, an empty trace of sneaker prints long gone. But you won't see the footprints of that afternoon, the moment when Ruth Ann walked into the unknown. The forest and granite around Fireplace Creek will hide a day's journey and absorb every step until nothing remains but a single backpack resting silent among the pines. David Paul Morrison, 1998. The morning began with thin fog rising from the Merced River, wrapping the cliffs in grey before the sun broke through. 28-year-old David Paul Morrison left his campsite in Little Yosemite Valley around 7:15. He told fellow hikers he was going to climb Half Dome and would be back later that day. He carried only a small waist pack, a water bottle, and some snacks. No tent, no jacket, no overnight gear. The trail to Half Dome starts gently but soon rises into constant climb. Past the roar of Vernal Fall, the path narrows near Nevada Fall, where granite steps glisten with spray. Beyond that, it becomes wilderness, steep switchbacks through pine forest and broken rock. At this time of year, late May, the snow is melting fast, sending water down every gully. The sky that morning was pale and unsettled, with clouds building above the ridgelines. Other hikers on the trail later told rangers they remembered him. One said he seemed cheerful, moving at a steady pace, focused on the climb ahead. By midday, weather on the upper slopes began to turn. Temperatures dropped. Fog crept in over the subdome and light rain glazed the granite. The cables leading to the top of Half Dome, already slick from snowmelt, became treacherous. The metal chilled under freezing wind and the view of the valley disappeared behind cloud. By evening, David's friends realized he hadn't returned. He had no flashlight or warm clothing. They waited through the night, expecting to see his silhouette appear on the trail with sunrise. But he never came back. The next morning, park rangers launched a search. Helicopters hovered above the face of Half Dome, scanning every ledge with spotters. Ground crews hiked the entire route, checking the cable path and the drainages that drop from the dome into Tenaya Canyon. Nothing. The timeline of that week follows the rhythm of effort and frustration. May 25th, David leaves camp at sunrise. May 26th, search begins with air and ground teams. May 27th, 75 rescuers, dog units and climbers sweep the area. Low clouds hide the ridge tops. May 28th, wind gusts force helicopters to pull back. Rain turns to snow overnight. May 30th, the official search scales down to limited patrols. Witness accounts give the last glimpses of him. One near the base of Nevada Fall, another higher up, near where the trail bends toward the subdome. After that, the weather and the landscape become the only storytellers. Rescuers said visibility dropped to almost nothing that week. Storm cells rolled through the high Sierra, wrapping Half Dome in mist and sleet. From above, the granite looked clean, featureless, impossible to search. On the ground, it was worse. The rock was slick, and runoff turned every slope into a slide. The forest below was thick, strewn with downed trees and crevices deep enough to swallow a person completely. At 8,000 feet, the cold arrives fast when the sun fades. Without shelter, a hiker can lose warmth within an hour. If David slipped or was forced off the trail by weather, he would have faced freezing conditions before nightfall. The rain that turned to snow on the summit left ice along the granite shelves. A fall from the cables would have been unrecoverable in that visibility. But no one saw a fall, and no equipment was ever found. No torn clothing, no camera, no remains. The trail looked as if no one had ever stepped on it. The weather became both the witness and the wall. Helicopters circled for days, sometimes grounded entirely when the cloud ceiling dropped below the rim. Dog teams worked short distances before the rain washed away scent. The sound of the falls drowned out voices, making communication nearly impossible. Rangers extended their search into drainages and the approach to Tenaya Canyon, a dangerous slot of waterfalls and cliffs that has claimed hikers before. Still, there was no sign of him. The park's records describe the case simply: missing hiker, last seen May 25th, presumed lost somewhere along the Half Dome route. To imagine his last moments, you have to see the mountain the way he might have. The cables rising ahead, the sky dimming, the valley invisible under cloud. Every direction looks the same when fog surrounds you. Up and down blur together. Wind pushes harder, and the slope grows slicker underfoot. The sound of water echoes from unseen walls. In that kind of weather, even experienced climbers lose bearings. One wrong step can mean a slide into a ravine, hidden from view by brush and stone. Once the storm passed, sunlight returned, and the mountain looked peaceful again, unchanged, silent, giving nothing back. David Paul Morrison remains one of Yosemite's missing. His name stays on the record, his last known moment frozen somewhere between the trail and the storm that closed over Half Dome that day. Kieran Burke, 2000. The day began clear and cool in Yosemite Valley. Morning light filtered through the granite walls, catching on the trees that surround Curry Village. Among the guests that morning was Kieran Burke, a 44-year-old visitor from Dublin, Ireland. He had arrived in the park a few days earlier, drawn by the same wonder that brings travellers from around the world: the waterfalls, the sheer cliffs, the air that seems cleaner than anywhere else on Earth. He was described as fit, friendly and fond of hiking. He had already taken short walks near the valley floor, stopping often to take photographs. On April 5th, 2000, he left his cabin in Curry Village around mid-morning. He wore a brown leather jacket, carried a small bag, and likely brought his camera with him. He told no one where exactly he was headed. That moment, stepping out from the cabins, the smell of pine and wood smoke still hanging in the air, was the last confirmed sighting of him. From there, possibilities unfold in every direction. The trails that leave Curry Village lead to different corners of the valley: Mirror Lake, Vernal Fall, Yosemite Falls, or the switchbacks that climb toward Glacier Point. Each of them starts easy and beautiful, then quickly turns wild. In early spring, some paths are still muddy from melting snow. Others are strewn with fallen branches or slick from runoff. The valley is deceptive, close to civilization, but within minutes the wilderness takes over. When Kieran didn't return that evening, no one raised immediate alarm. It's common for hikers to spend a long day exploring before coming back after dark. But when a full day passed with no sign of him, park rangers checked his cabin. His belongings were still there. His rental car sat untouched in the Curry Village parking lot. No indication that he'd planned to stay out overnight. The search began quietly and expanded fast. Rangers and volunteers combed the main trails leading out of Curry Village. They looked under the cliffs of Glacier Point, along the mist trail toward Vernal and Nevada Falls, and through the forests behind the cabins. Helicopters swept the ridge lines. Dog teams worked the wooded areas near Mirror Lake. Nothing appeared. Days turned into a week. The weather changed, bringing light rain and fog that made visibility difficult. Each new search grid ended the same way: empty. His name and photograph were shared with visitors in nearby towns. There were no confirmed sightings after that morning. The terrain around Curry Village is deceptive in scale. Just a few minutes off the main trail, the land folds into deep gullies and steep slopes. Granite walls rise hundreds of feet, and between them run hidden creeks. A person stepping off a marked trail can vanish from view within seconds. Rangers know how easily sound disappears here. You can shout and the echo folds back on itself, as if the valley swallows your voice. Investigators learned that Kieran had not registered for any backcountry permit. That meant he hadn't planned an extended hike. He was likely carrying only what he needed for a few hours: water, a snack, his camera. Without warm clothing or shelter, an unexpected fall or storm could have been devastating. Search crews continued for nearly 2 weeks. They checked drainage systems, riverbanks and ravines. They explored rock fields below the main cliffs where accidents sometimes occur. No footprints, no clothing, no camera lens, no trace of a struggle. The Curry Village cabin remained just as he'd left it. His rental car still parked in the same spot, the keys inside. The official record of his disappearance lists his last known location simply as near Curry Village. Beyond that, nothing is certain. Imagine him walking out from the cabins that morning, camera strap over his shoulder, hands in his jacket pockets, the valley around him quiet except for the wind through the pines. The granite cliffs shine pale grey above, waterfalls echo in the distance. He follows the path out of sight into the trees, and then, somewhere between the marked trails and the wilderness beyond, his footsteps end. Timothy John Barnes, 1988. A bright July morning greeted the trailhead at Tenaya Lake in Yosemite National Park. On July 5th, 1988, 24-year-old Timothy John Barnes stepped off from the Murphy Creek trailhead, planning a day hike toward Polydome Lakes. He was 6'4" tall, weighed about 180 pounds, carried a yellow day pack, wore a white t-shirt with a red circle and slash design, grey sweatpants, white sneakers and brown-framed sunglasses. He had an orthopedic pin in his left ankle and a small wart on the right side of his nose. The terrain ahead looked manageable. From Tenaya Lake, the route toward Polydome Lakes is roughly 3 miles of trail through high country forest, granite outcroppings and ridge lines. Mountains cradle alpine lakes, and the dome named Polydome rises over 1,600 feet above the lake's shore. Its slopes steep, its summit rough. But on that day of departure, the track from Tenaya Lake should have been clear for a fit hiker. search and rescue sprang into action the day after he failed to return. On July 6th, rangers combed the trail corridor from Tenaya Lake toward Polly Dome. They pressed up ridges, scanned slopes, called for witnesses. An article from the time noted the search included ground crews and helicopters, but nothing turned up. The official case file lists his last known location as July 5th, 1988, at Tenaya Lake heading north from the Murphy Creek trailhead. The terrain complicates rapid discovery. Granite slabs around Polly Dome reflect sunlight and hide shadows. Forest stands deep. Trails fade into game tracks. Gullies funnel rain but also erase footprints quickly. If Barnes deviated from the established trail for even a few minutes, the search zone could multiply. The higher you go, the narrower and rougher the terrain becomes. The fewer the visitors, the fewer the markers. Days passed. Teams expanded searches into side drainages, rock fields, ridgelines west of Tenaya Lake. But the summer heat rendered rock surfaces slick with runoff. Small creeks swelled and underbrush thickened. Helicopters struggled with thermal updrafts and shadowed ridges. Dogs moved slowly under the dense forest canopy. The search shifted modes by the end of the week, not because hope died, but because the land refused to yield. As the sun climbed each day, so did the challenges. The high country hosts sudden storms even in July. Granite that is dry one hour becomes slick the next. A minor injury may slow a hiker to the point where nightfall sets in above treeline. In Barnes's case, he carried only a day pack. No heavy gear listed, no overnight supplies recorded. Once the trail broadened to none, once the ridge cooled, the wilderness took charge. Search logs show the park scaled back full search operations within 10 days. Each grid returned empty. The official missing person listing remains open. His body and gear have never been found. Picture that morning, yellow pack swinging at his back, pine needles crackling underfoot, granite shining ahead. A young man confident of the day's journey, heading into the high country. Then imagine the granite slopes, the ridges shifting into mist, the forest swallowing sound and sight. The trail drops off. The day pack lies somewhere unseen. The search teams call out and get no answer. The trail becomes the terrain, becomes blank space. Dikran Dik Knadjian, 1972. A warm July morning in Yosemite Valley welcomed the 20-year-old medical student Dikran Dik Knadjian as he checked in at Camp Curry Village on July 24, 1972. He had flown in from England, studying at Cambridge University, and was taking a summer break with plans to visit Yosemite, then travel on to Florida. He wore bell-bottom jeans and desert boots, carried a 35mm Pentax camera with zoom lens and shoulder strap. He even wore an orange Omega Seamaster wristwatch. At the registration desk, he asked for directions. He wanted to hike to the famed Half Dome. That simple question is the last confirmed moment we have of him inside the park. After leaving the desk at Camp Curry Village, his trace disappears. His car remains parked, his bag untouched. The wilderness becomes the story. From that trailhead moment, the terrain of Yosemite expands around him. Granite cliffs soaring, forest draped across walls and ridges, day hiker paths turning quickly into game trails and monolithic rock faces. Even though Half Dome is now one of the more iconic landmarks, in 1972 the paths were less maintained. The route he likely intended crossed from the valley floor, up past waterfalls, through carved granite steps, into thinner air and fewer footprints. Witnesses last saw Dikran at the desk. He asked for directions, received a map. He carried his camera, seemingly ready. He did not register for a backcountry permit, giving the impression of a day hike or short excursion. His intentions were simple, but the decision to go alone in terrain that offers few forgiving edges suddenly becomes crucial. Search operations began when he did not return. Rangers logged the missing person case. The US National Park Service includes his name in its missing from Yosemite list. Yet the search turned up nothing. No equipment, no camera, no first aid kit, no bag of film, no footprints traced into the wilds. The terrain had swallowed them. Granite slabs dominate near Half Dome, trees thin, weather changes fast. A sunny valley morning can become wind-whipped at the ridges, mist creeping in. The forest floor under pine and fir hides footprints seconds after they're made. Streambeds surge overnight. Gorges and gullies shift. A young man, camera in hand, stepping off trail by mistake or to catch a view. might turn left instead of right and find himself in a no-return corridor, because the last sighting is at the trailhead, and from there everything is unknown. The moment when the trailway ends is invisible. No rescued bag, no photography found, nothing but silence. The camera straps and lens specifics underline the realism. This was a man tracking images of Yosemite, not fleeing danger. Yet danger may have come undetected. Imagine, the sun filters through the valley walls, he crosses the meadow toward the trail, camera over his shoulder. Up ahead the granite rises, the path narrows past vernal fall depending on route. Shadows deepen, one step onto wet rock, one diverted side path. Time slips. When friends or rangers later searched, they found no sign of him. Day 3, Day 5, search grids expand, but the forest, the rock, the drainage channels absorb everything, and this chapter doesn't hold the moment of separation, because we don't know it. We hold instead the trailhead and the last sighting, a young student with camera asking directions to Half Dome. The valley behind him still, the mountains ahead active. The photo gear becomes a silent relic of intent. In his absence, we stare at the map, at ridges, at granite, asking, what route did he pick? How far did he get? At which point did the land take over? And why did no evidence remain? In the files of Yosemite and of law enforcement, his case remains open. His name listed among those who entered the wilderness and left no footprints behind. That warm July day, the trailhead question, the camera, those are real. The rest is blank. Jeff Estes, 1976. Late May in Yosemite still carries the bite of winter at higher elevations. Patches of snow linger in shaded hollows, and meltwater rushes through granite gullies, cold and fast. On the morning of May 24, 1976, Jeff Estes, 25 years old, parked his car along Tioga Road, near the turnoff to May Lake. His plan was straightforward: hike from May Lake through the high country and descend into Yosemite Valley by way of Snow Creek Trail. It was a trip that thousands attempt every year, but Jeff would never complete it. Rangers later found his car exactly where he left it, locked, neat and undisturbed. Inside were no signs of trouble, no gear suggesting a longer journey. Everything about it pointed to a simple day hike. From the parking area, the May Lake Trail climbs gently at first, cutting through lodgepole pines before breaking into open granite. The air there is thin and sharp. At nearly 9,000 feet, the sun is stronger, and the sound of the forest feels distant. For a hiker, it's a stunning stretch of land, white rock, turquoise water, and the dark line of Mount Hoffman in the background. Jeff's intended route from that point was long but well known. The trail winds south, passing alpine meadows and high ridges before eventually merging with the Snow Creek descent into the valley. It's one of Yosemite's oldest trails, steep and exposed in sections, dropping more than 4,000 feet to the floor below. In good conditions, a fit hiker can cover it in a long day, but conditions in late May are rarely consistent. Snow patches cling to shaded slopes, creeks overflow, and fog can move in fast. When Jeff didn't arrive in Yosemite Valley as expected, rangers initiated a search. They began by confirming his vehicle's location, then expanded outward from the May Lake trailhead. Foot patrols fanned across every possible route he might have taken. Helicopters scanned the ridgelines and the forested drainages below. Nothing. The search reports describe a wide sweep of the terrain, crews hiking day after day through gullies and slopes littered with granite boulders and downed trees. Dogs were deployed where scent might linger, but the combination of altitude, wind, and recent snowmelt made tracking nearly impossible. The steep drop towards Snow Creek is a labyrinth of switchbacks and cliffs. Once someone steps off that narrow path, even a few meters, they can disappear from sight completely. For days, rescuers moved between May Lake and Snow Creek, calling his name into the wind, listening for any answer that might echo back. The forest remained silent. The helicopter crews circled until fuel forced them to return. No footprints, no clothing, no campfire ash. Nothing that tied Jeff to any location beyond where his car was found. The terrain itself was the main suspect. The route between May Lake and Yosemite Valley runs through some of the park's most unforgiving geography. Snowmelt turns streams into traps of slick stone. The granite domes radiate heat by day but lose it instantly after sunset. If Jeff misjudged the distance or slipped trying to cross a creek swollen with runoff, he might have been caught in a place no rescuer could easily reach. Even a small fall in that country can lead to hidden drop-offs where debris collects and visibility from the air is nearly zero. Rangers noted that Jeff had been well prepared for a normal day hike, but he was not equipped for multiple nights out. With no tent, no heavy jacket, and only limited food or water, a single wrong turn late in the afternoon could quickly turn dangerous. Temperatures that high in the mountains fall sharply after dark, and by the second night the cold alone would have made movement difficult. As the days went on, the operation shifted from full rescue to recovery. The search radius widened, but the landscape gave up nothing. Helicopters hovered over the deep canyons where meltwater cut through granite. Ground teams climbed through brush, thick with fallen pine needles and decomposing wood. Not even a piece of gear appeared. Weeks later, the case was entered into Yosemite's official record of missing persons. His car remained at the May Lake trailhead until it was finally removed, the only physical trace of his presence left in the park. Standing at that same trailhead today, the surroundings look unchanged. Tall pines framing the lake, the white shimmer of granite slopes, and the stillness that settles in when the wind stops. You can almost picture him there, tightening his bootlaces, adjusting the strap of his pack, glancing at the map one last time before heading into the high country. The trail curves upward, disappears behind the trees, and then everything beyond becomes unknowable. From that point on, the only certainty is silence. The silence of granite and wind, of a trail that never led him back. Susan Shantin, 1978. The forest air around the Wildcat Creek area was unusually quiet that May morning. A gentle haze of spring mist hovered above the water, and the fresh green of new leaves glowed in the dawn light. On May 14, 1978, 26-year-old Susan Shantin slipped away from the familiar boundaries of the valley and into Yosemite's wooded backcountry. She was last seen near Wildcat Creek, and from that point on, the wilderness closed over her trail. The official park records place her disappearance as date missing May 14, 1978, last known point Wildcat Creek. The documentation is brief, no detailed itinerary, no permit for extended backcountry travel listed. The absence of gear lists or plans adds weight to the mystery. What we do know, Susan was with her husband, Michael Shantin, when the party ventured into that side canyon of Yosemite, and that she lost footing crossing a creek near Wildcat Creek, or at least that is how the initial witness accounts describe it. As search teams assembled, Yosemite land took its natural role in the story. The terrain around Wildcat Creek is steep, rugged, and belongs first to the creeks and gullies. Trails fade quickly in this zone. The official paths give way to game tracks and loose rock. The forest is dense. Firs, pines and cedars crowd together, their needles layering the ground and obscuring footprints. Water flows down slick granite, moss-covered rock, slippery ledges. Within hours, even fresh prints vanish. Wind shakes branches, showers of pine needles hide tracks. The creek can swell quickly with spring runoff, and the narrow canyon becomes a flow of sound and movement. Search logs for Susan's case describe crews focusing on Wildcat Creek's immediate surroundings and then expanding outward into ridgelines and drainage basins above the creek. Helicopters scanned from above, but the thick tree cover and narrow canyon geometry limited visibility. Ground teams followed the creek, probed side gullies, climbed the slopes, but found no gear, no backpack, no shoe prints, nothing that identified Susan's path. One day, the search teams moved upstream until the creek became too steep for safe travel. Another day, they climbed ridges to get vantage points, looking for possible escape routes or signs of movement. Wet spring rocks hampered progress. Dogs completed sweeps, but scent tracks faded within hours because of moisture and wind. The terrain was unyielding. At some point, the park scaled back its full search after 2 weeks of extensive efforts. Still on the books as missing, Susan's case remains unsolved. The terrain continues to be the primary obstacle. Dense forest, steep slopes, hidden creeks, and granite slabs that echo nothing. The land does not preserve a trail for long. It simply absorbs movement and erases it. Picture the moment. She steps along Wildcat Creek, green water rushing past narrow rock banks, birds calling overhead, light filtering in. A small misstep on wet stone, a splash, a turn. The trail continues, but the human intention falters. She moves upward or downward into the woods. The creek may have pulled at her path, The canyon may have swallowed her forward motion. For Yosemite rangers and searchers, the mountain offers many such moments, where a person is present one second and gone the next. Though the data is sparse, the scenario consistent. Susan's last confirmed location at Wildcat Creek, no further evidence, and the terrain that allowed the disappearance to happen. The forest waits quietly now, the water rushes, and the search map remains filled with blank spaces. Searchers still ask, did she try to cross the creek? Did she slip and fall? Did she move off trail into a drainage? Did she descend into a bed of granite that cannot be surveyed easily from above? Without any physical trace, the question remains. The forest retains its secrets. In that region of the park, the canyon walls, the rushing creek, the narrow bottoms, one moment of imbalance or diversion becomes enough. A solitary hiker, a hidden turn, an unseen drop. Yosemite's terrain has accepted many such stories and kept them hidden. In Susan Shantin's case, the paper trail ends and the terrain takes over entirely. If you visit Wildcat Creek today, the water still flows, the spray still echoes off granite, the forest still shades the rock. You can sit on a boulder, trace the creek's path, listen for human sound and hear just the water. And you can feel how a person could slip beyond sight beneath canopy or into a crevice where no spotlight ever reaches. That day in May, Susan walked into the wilderness. The land received her motion, and the trail ends there. Kenneth Klein, 1967. The morning of July 28, 1967 began warm and still in Yosemite Valley. The air was dry, the granite cliffs glowed pale in the early sun, and the smell of pine sap drifted through the campgrounds. In Camp 4, a 23-year-old seasonal employee named Kenneth Klein prepared for a hike he'd mentioned to a few co-workers the day before. He told them he planned to head toward Eagle Peak, one of the highest viewpoints above the valley floor. It was a common destination for hikers familiar with the park, difficult but accessible, a full day's climb that rewarded those who reached the summit with an unmatched view. He left sometime that morning, likely mid to late morning according to witnesses, wearing light hiking clothes and carrying a small pack. He was known to be fit and capable, and Eagle Peak was well within his ability. It was a day off, the weather was perfect, and the plan sounded simple. Camp 4, his starting point, sits at the base of Yosemite Falls, surrounded by towering cliffs and thick forest. The trail to Eagle Peak climbs the north rim of the valley, roughly 3,500 feet of elevation gain from start to finish. The first portion winds up steep switchbacks beside Yosemite Falls before flattening briefly through wooded benches and then rising again over granite ledges. From there, it's about 8 miles round trip, the kind of strenuous but straightforward trek thousands attempt every year. That morning, others in the camp remembered seeing Kenneth walking out toward the Yosemite Falls trail. Some said he was alone, quiet but cheerful. After that, no one saw him again. When he didn't report for work the next day, colleagues checked his tent. His belongings were still there, clothing folded, gear undisturbed. His car remained parked at the employee area near the camp. He hadn't checked out, hadn't mentioned any change of plans, and hadn't signed up for an overnight permit. The missing report went to park rangers by noon. The first search began that afternoon. Rangers moved quickly up the Yosemite Falls trail, sweeping both sides of the main route toward Eagle Peak. It's an area notorious for its mix of open rock and thick pine forest, with sections of the trail that can be confusing to those unfamiliar with the switchbacks. There are also numerous side paths, faint unmarked routes created by runoff or by hikers seeking shortcuts. Step off the maintained trail by even a few feet and the footing changes drastically. Dust becomes gravel, gravel gives way to polished granite, and the slope steepens without warning. Searchers climbed through the afternoon heat, shouting his name, stopping to listen for any response that might echo back. The only sounds were the crash of Yosemite Creek far below and the wind moving through the pines. By the next morning, the search expanded. Helicopters from the Park Service scanned the upper rim of the valley. The view from the air, however, made the job harder, not easier. Shadows from the cliffs created dark patches where the forest canopy hid everything below. The canyon walls folded in on themselves, and even trained spotters struggled to see through the distortion of light and rock. On the ground, search teams pushed farther, from the base of Yosemite Falls all the way to the Eagle Peak meadows and beyond. They checked drainages, rock shelves, and creek crossings. They marked every possible path where someone might have slipped or wandered. yet nothing appeared. No footprints, no piece of gear, no fragment of clothing. It was as though Kenneth had walked into the mountain and vanished. The park's search reports described the area as steep, fractured granite with heavy timber and poor visibility. The north rim of Yosemite Valley is a maze of broken slopes, littered with boulders and cut by gullies that plunge hundreds of feet. Loose soil slides easily, and fallen branches obscure narrow ledges. Even experienced climbers respect the terrain. One wrong step near the rim can lead into vertical drops that rescue teams often cannot safely reach. As days passed, weather shifted. Afternoon storms rolled across the Sierra, bringing wind and bursts of rain. The ground became slick, the sound of the falls drowned out voices, and scent trails for search dogs disappeared within hours. Helicopters continued to hover, lowering rescuers to possible locations, but no trace of Kenneth surfaced. His case grew colder by the week. Rangers revisited Camp 4, inspected his car again, spoke to everyone who had interacted with him before the hike. Nothing stood out. He had not expressed distress or plans to travel elsewhere. His hike to Eagle Peak was routine, a familiar route to those who lived and worked in the valley. Some rescuers believed he might have fallen from one of the ledges near the Upper Falls Overlook, where unmaintained paths run dangerously close to sheer drop-offs. Others suspected he could have veered toward the rim above Eagle Creek, where the granite domes look deceptively similar. Once disoriented, a hiker can move in circles without realizing it, descending into ravines where sound and sight vanish together. By the 10th day, the official search scaled down. Volunteers continued to explore sections of the rim, but the result remained the same: no evidence. His name was entered into Yosemite's list of missing persons, with a brief summary: last seen leaving Camp 4 to hike toward Eagle Peak, July 28, 1967. Standing at Camp 4 today, you can still trace the first part of that trail. The roar of Yosemite Falls fills the air, and the granite walls seem close enough to touch. The path climbs in wide, uneven steps through oak and pine, sunlight flashing between branches. From the base, it looks manageable, almost inviting. But as it rises, the forest thickens, the switchbacks twist, and the drop beside the trail becomes steeper with every turn. It's easy to imagine how somewhere above that valley a hiker could take one wrong turn and never find the way back down. That was the last trail Kenneth Klein was known to walk. His car remained parked, his campsite untouched, and the mountains beyond Camp 4 kept their silence. Fred Comstock, 1975. A sharp breeze swept across the granite ridges above Vogelsang High Sierra Camp in early September 1975. The air smelled of sun-warmed rock and distant snow melt from hidden pockets above. It was into that wild place that Fred Worm Comstock, just 19 years old, stepped out and vanished. His last known location: Vogelsang High Sierra Camp, Yosemite National Park. Fred had travelled with a woman and her young son, whom he'd recently met. While at camp, arrangements were made. Fred would head off to retrieve the companion's car at Tuolumne Meadows and then drive it to Yosemite Valley where they would meet. That plan became the last confirmed point of his presence. He never returned to the rendezvous. His own gear, his wallet, his license remained behind. Personal items in the vehicle showed he had not completed the drive. The paper trail ends at the moment he departed for that path through the high country. From Vogelsang, the route back toward Tuolumne Meadows or toward the valley is steep and complex. The terrain slides from open alpine meadows into dense fir forest, then granite ridges drop sharply into gorges carved by meltwater and time. If Fred set out along an old route, he would need to choose between staying on trail, dropping into a gorge, or climbing a ridge. The summer of 1975 was no bore. Melt runoff ran fast, gullies were slick, loose rock abundant. As evening approached, the mountain cooled fast. A slip late afternoon could shift a day hike into a nighttime crisis. Search teams from the park responded within hours of his failure to meet the scheduled rendezvous. Rangers and volunteers swept the routes between Vogelsang, Tuolumne Meadows and Yosemite Valley. They probed ridgelines, forest benches, creek beds. They looked for dropped packs, tracks, any sign of camp or injury. But the terrain swallowed them. No piece of clothing, no gear, no body. The land gave no clue. In that high alpine zone, tranquility disguises danger. The trees thin, the rock becomes exposed. A hiker who leaves the trail for a shortcut or scenic view may unknowingly turn into a dozen possible drainage paths. Creeks carry debris and footprints alike into basins where they vanish from view. A cold breeze coming down the ridges at sunset might bite without warning, and if someone was alone, without backup, medical help far away, even a minor injury can be fatal. The official listing of Yellowstone's unsolved cases notes Fred's as last seen at Vogelsang, date missing November 30th, 1975, though many sources identify September 1st as the day he first disappeared. Regardless, his vehicle and belongings were not recovered in a reachable condition, his tracks effectively erased. Search operations scaled down after weeks, shifting from full-force rescue to periodic monitoring. The park still lists his case among the unresolved. Imagine Fred's last steps, leaving the camp in the morning heat, backpack light, the alpine meadow golden in the sun. He crosses the green, passes the log bunkhouses of Vogelsang, climbs toward ridge or trail. The view opens to Tuolumne meadows far below, but the path narrows. Rocks glitter with mica, a creek rushes unseen under fallen logs, trail markers fade. The forest closes in and the ridgeline runs thin, sun dips, shadows creep. Fred continues. The trail becomes less certain. Sound travels poorly in that canyon, voices fade into wind, and then everything goes silent. In Yosemite's wild backcountry, the map shows lines, but the land does not follow them exactly. A hiker may believe they are on trail, yet the trail may vanish under rockfall or bypass into game tracks. In Fred's route area, rock slabs are slick, creek beds unstable, ridges break off into steep slopes. Search helicopters often cannot detect signals because the forest canopy, ridge shadows and narrow gorges hide human markers. On foot, searchers found only the silence. Fred Comstock remains a name on the missing list. Last seen at Vogelsang High Sierra Camp. No gear, no body, no conclusive trace beyond that day. The terrain beyond the camp is unforgiving and remote. That high country still stands, the breeze still moves across the ridges, and somewhere, in that vastness, Fred's footsteps ended. Nelson Paisley, 1969. The sun hung low on the granite walls around the Merced River's cascades in Yosemite on May 31, 1969, when Nelson Paisley, age 14, stepped into the water and vanished. He had joined his family visiting the park, and that morning he walked to the famous cascade area of the Merced, intending only to wade in the river. The final official listing places his last known point as Merced River at Cascades, wading in river. Nelson's presence in the water looked routine, a young teenager enjoying a summer day, boots off, trousers rolled up, stepping into the shallow flow of the river. But the river did not remain shallow. The Merced at that stretch flows over smooth granite slabs, gathers speed, channels into narrow rock-formed steps, and feeders drop into hidden pockets. What begins as a gentle wading spot can, within seconds, transform into a moving force of water capable of pulling a person under, especially when the rock beneath is slick and the current masked by the spray of the cascades. In that terrain, the river becomes both inviting and unforgiving. The Cascade section lies just upstream of Yosemite Valley and is popular with visitors, but that popularity brings none of the guarantees. The rock surfaces are polished by years of flow and human footsteps alike. Pine needles accumulate on the edges, tree cover above throws abrupt shadows. If someone wades into the rapids unaware of sudden shifts in flow, the margin for error is razor thin. Witnesses recall seeing Nelson earlier that day stepping into the river with others nearby. He walked past a marked area toward a shallow pool formed by the runoff from the Cascades. His family later reported he was last seen around noon and failed to return to their campsite. Rangers were alerted when hours passed with no sign of him leaving the area. The search began almost immediately, focusing on the river corridor. Ground crews walked alongside the banks, scanning for clothing, shoes, or any disturbance. Float boats and inflatables moved downstream, nets checked the slow eddies, and helicopters examined the stands of trees above for any telltale spot. But none emerged. The river had given no clue. Weather plays a deceptive role here. In late May, the snowmelt still feeds the Merced heavily. Even a sunny morning raises the water level and subsurface currents. Midday warming can release water from high country melt, increasing volume without warning. That day, though skies were clear, the river's flow was stronger than surface calm suggested. 1 minute the water laps gently, the next it can surge across a granite slope and plunge into a submerged ledge. producing a suction effect. Search logs mentioned flyover photographs showing white water below the cascades, dark lines of foam swirling in dozens of micro-eddies, each a trap. Rangers noted that a slip into that water could carry a person under granite overhangs or into a deep pocket of water before surfacing is possible. Add to that the remoteness of the section. Within minutes, one is out of sight of the main trail, trees obscure aerial views, and the sound of the falls washes out human voices. As the searchers poured through the riverbed and banks for days, they found no personal items that matched Nelson's description. No sneakers, no jacket, no watch. The water had washed away most traces. Pine needles, leaves, and small debris moved downstream overnight. Divers attempted to check submerged shelves near granite ledges, but all efforts produced silence. The terrain refused to cooperate. When the river runs, it becomes a conveyor. Submerged slabs, hidden holes, spikes of granite beckon the careless. For a young person wading and perhaps exploring, misjudging the depth or the flow speed is easy. If one falls, the current can carry a body into a canyon channel where retrieval is extremely difficult. The searcher's presence is strong at first, but is often defeated by water, rock, and time. In this chapter's story, the witness is the crowd on the banks, the family waiting nearby. The weather and water hazard is the river itself, unpredictable and potent. The moment of disappearance is not marked by a scream or a fall, it is marked by absence. A boy walks into water and doesn't come out. The river remains calm in appearance but remains dangerous. From that late morning forward, the timeline narrows. Family alerts rangers. Search teams respond. But with each hour, the possibility of locating Nelson alive diminishes. The Merced River continues its flow, unperturbed by human fear. The terrain gives up nothing. No article of clothing, no buoyant remnant, no echo of a voice. The only constant is the river's motion and the wilderness beyond. Imagine standing on a rock ledge near the Cascades, feeling the spray of water, hearing the roar of the runoff. A boy wades forward, stepping into shallow water. The path seems easy, safe. Behind him is the forest. Ahead, the curve of the river where granite drops sharply into deeper current. He moves on. The next moment, only the river remains visible from the bank. The forest absorbs his trail. The water conceals his passage. The day continues, and only the texture of the spray, the motion of the river remains. Christine Fuentes, 1970. The sound of vernal fall in early summer is relentless, a wall of thunder echoing through the valley. Mist fills the air like a low cloud, coating the granite with a slick, invisible film. On June 17, 1970, 16-year-old Christine Fuentes stood among that mist with family members and other visitors near the Emerald Pool, just upstream of vernal fall. It was a bright day, warm and deceptively calm. The river looked smooth at first glance, wide and slow under the sun. No one watching from the rocks could have guessed how fast that current was moving beneath the surface. Christine had travelled to Yosemite with a church youth group from Southern California. They spent the morning hiking the Mist Trail, one of the park's most iconic routes. It climbs along the Merced River, following a series of stone steps carved into the mountainside, climbing beside waterfalls until it reaches the top of Vernal Fall. From there, visitors often pause at the Emerald Pool, a flat basin where the river appears tranquil, glowing green from the sunlight refracted through the water. It's a place that invites people to rest, take photos, and sometimes wade in. That afternoon, Christine and two friends walked toward the edge of the pool. They removed their shoes and stepped into the cold mountain water. A few others were nearby doing the same, sitting on rocks or dipping their hands in. The surface looked calm, but the late spring snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada had turned the Merced River into a hidden torrent. Beneath the smooth water, the current raced toward the edge of the falls, accelerating through channels that couldn't be seen from where they stood. According to witnesses, Christine lost her footing almost instantly. One moment she was standing in ankle-deep water, the next she was swept off balance. The wet granite offered nothing to hold onto. Her friends screamed, reaching for her arm, but the current was too fast. Within seconds she was pulled downstream, her body spinning toward the invisible lip of Vernal Fall, where the water drops over 300 feet into the mist below. Rangers arrived within minutes of the first report. The witnesses described what they had seen, pointing to the same spot along the pool where the river narrows and quickens before it cascades over the edge. Searchers positioned themselves along the lower stretch of the Merced, hoping the current might release her somewhere along the riverbank. Helicopters circled the base of the waterfall through clouds of spray, but visibility was poor. The water was thick with foam and sediment, making it nearly impossible to see beneath the surface. As evening fell, teams from the National Park Service worked the area with long poles, probing along the edges of rocks and driftwood. The force of the water made even simple movements dangerous. Rescue personnel had to anchor themselves to boulders to avoid being dragged away. Night brought fog and falling temperatures. They continued searching the next morning, but there was no sign of her. The conditions that day, warm weather after a cold spring ray, had created one of the strongest flows in years. Snowmelt from higher elevations poured into the Merced River faster than the park's runoff gauges could measure. From the footbridge near the top of the mist trail, the river appeared calm, but its depth and force made it unpredictable. The granite slope under the pool, polished smooth by centuries of current, offered no traction. Visitors later told rangers they hadn't realised how close the safe area was to the actual drop, separated only by a few metres of slick rock. By the second day, the search extended downstream past Happy Isles, where the river widens and slows before bending back toward Yosemite Valley. Divers checked calmer eddies and shallow inlets. Helicopters scanned both banks. Park rangers set up observation points near the base of Vernal Fall, but the heavy mist made it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the edge. Water temperatures hovered near freezing, reducing visibility even further. Christine's parents, who had been waiting at the valley campground, were informed of the accident that evening. The park closed portions of the mist trail, while the search continued. Visitors reported seeing search teams for several days afterward. Men in orange vests moving along the rocks, sometimes kneeling near the river, calling out her name and listening for any sign. But the river kept its silence. That summer, Yosemite experienced several drownings connected to snowmelt runoff. Rangers posted new warning signs at the Emerald Pool and the riverbanks above Vernal Fall. The message was simple, but often ignored. The water is faster than it looks. Even now, decades later, those signs still stand near the same spot where Christine was last seen. To understand the danger of that place, you only need to stand by the pool on a warm day in early summer. The granite gleams in the sun. Tourists laugh, cameras click, and a fine mist floats in the air. The river moves with deceptive smoothness. You can feel the pull of it, a quiet power sliding toward the fall's edge, invisible beneath the green surface. A single step too far, and the current takes over completely. Christine Fuentes was last seen near that edge, wading in shallow water that seemed harmless. The sound of Vernal Fall roared louder than the screams that followed. The mist swallowed her, and the current carried her out of sight. The river kept flowing unchanged, while searchers moved downstream through the valley, calling her name into the noise of the water. Jerome Oldillas, 1970. The afternoon sun was high over the Merced River on June 23, 1970, when Jerome Oldillas, a 24-year-old visitor from California, was last seen alive. It was a hot day in Yosemite, the kind that makes the river seem calm and inviting, a relief from the granite heat. Around him, families were picnicking along the riverbanks near the Cascade Dam, where the current widens and slows before descending again toward the valley. The air shimmered above the water, and people waded into the shallows to cool off. Jerome stepped onto a large granite boulder that jutted out into the river. Witnesses later said he seemed relaxed, sitting on the sun-warmed rock, feet dangling just above the surface, chatting with friends nearby. No one realized that beneath the still appearance of the water, the river was moving fast, charged by heavy snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada. The Merced said that June was swollen, unpredictable, and deceptively smooth on top. The section of river near the dam is known for its shifting depth. The flow can look gentle one moment and surge the next. Smooth channels hide sudden drops, and slippery algae coat every submerged surface. Even a few inches of water can turn treacherous when the current accelerates. The day Jerome disappeared, rangers had already warned visitors to avoid swimming or wading because of rising runoff levels. At around 3 p.m, several witnesses saw Jerome lean forward, possibly to scoop water with his hands or adjust his balance. In that instant, he slipped. The rock, polished by years of flow, offered no grip. He fell into the river and was immediately swept away. The surface looked calm until he hit the faster current. Then he was gone. His friends shouted for help and ran along the bank, but the water moved too quickly. Within seconds, Jerome vanished downstream, pulled into the churning water below the dam. Rangers were notified within minutes. The first team arrived from Yosemite Valley and began scanning the stretch of river below the Cascade Dam. The current there divides around boulders and tree trunks, forming swirling eddies that can drag debris under for long stretches before releasing it again. The searchers threw ropes, used poles to test for snags, and moved along both banks. Visibility in the water was almost zero. Runoff had turned it cloudy with silt and foam. The weather that day was clear, but it worked against them. The strong sun accelerated the snowmelt from higher elevations, increasing the river's flow by the hour. What looked like a steady current in the morning became faster and deeper as the afternoon went on. Searchers described the river as high and dangerous, with water temperatures near freezing. Even trained swimmers could not last long in those conditions. The rescue team had to work from the edges, tied to lines to avoid being pulled in themselves. Helicopters arrived later in the afternoon, scanning downstream stretches where the river bends toward the El Portal Road. From the air, searchers could see patterns in the current, dark ribbons marking deeper channels, but no trace of a person. Boats were deployed the next morning, navigating carefully through rapids and submerged rocks. Every likely point of entrapment was checked, every eddy cleared, every fallen tree examined. There was nothing. By the second day, rangers began to suspect Jerome's body had been pinned under a ledge or trapped beneath a submerged log. The Merced in that section drops steeply, carving deep holes and undercuts into the granite bed. Water pressure can hold an object down for weeks before releasing it miles away. The river offers no predictable pattern. It gives back what it wants, when it wants. As the search continued, the weather remained hot and bright. The water rose higher each afternoon, faster and louder. Reporters noted that this was one of the strongest runoff years in a decade, fueled by heavy Sierra snowpack from the previous winter. Several other drownings had already occurred in Yosemite that spring under similar circumstances. The Park Service issued repeated warnings to visitors. The river is stronger than it appears, stay away from the edge. Rangers, divers and volunteers spent days walking the banks, probing with poles and grappling hooks. They found small items, driftwood, bits of plastic, debris caught in tree roots, but nothing that belonged to Jerome. The sound of the river made communication difficult. Rescuers had to shout over the roar of the current. At times, mist rose from the rapids, blurring visibility further. By the end of the first week, the search scaled back. Helicopter flights continued intermittently, focusing on the calmer stretches downstream, but the Merced remained too dangerous for divers. The currents could sweep a person or a rope line hundreds of feet in seconds. Rangers estimated that the water near the dam was moving at over 600 cubic feet per second, enough to carry logs, branches, and stones downstream like toys. The spot where Jerome was last seen remains one of Yosemite's most deceptive places. On dry days, it looks serene, a wide ribbon of clear water between pale boulders, framed by pines and the distant cliffs of the valley. But beneath that calm surface, the river runs deep and fast, twisting through channels that have claimed more than a few lives over the years. The granite there is slick even when dry, and the algae film near the waterline makes it nearly impossible to stand without slipping. On that June afternoon, Jerome Aldiges sat on one of those rocks, unaware of how dangerous the river had become. Witnesses said he smiled as he looked out at the water, sunlight reflecting off the surface. A few moments later he was gone, taken by a current that gave no warning and left no trace. The river continued its motion, endless and unbroken, carrying its secrets downstream. Walter Gordon, 1954. Morning sunlight spilled into Yosemite Valley on April 16, 1954, washing over the tall cliffs and turning the granite walls gold. Spring was just settling in, and the park was quiet, the kind of calm that comes before the summer crowds. In Curry Village, a 31-year-old visitor named Walter Gordon prepared for a day hike. He told a few people he intended to climb the Ledge Trail, a steep and mostly unmaintained route that once led from the valley floor up toward Glacier Point. It was considered dangerous even then, and rangers often discouraged visitors from attempting it. But Walter was determined. He packed light, left in the early morning, and walked into the forest. He was never seen again. The ledge trail had been built decades earlier, before the park had the safety infrastructure it does today. It follows a direct line up the cliffs behind Curry Village, cutting through unstable rock, thick brush, and sections of sheer granite. By the 1950s, it was already in poor condition, narrow, eroded, and unmarked in places. Rangers had posted warnings advising hikers to use the longer but safer 4-mile trail instead. Still, the ledge trail held an allure for those seeking solitude or a challenge. It was shorter, more direct, and offered dramatic views of the valley along the way. Walter's choice wasn't unusual for its time. Hiking alone was common, and park maps still showed the trail as an option. He was described as fit and confident. He left Curry Village sometime between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, carrying only light gear, likely a canteen, a jacket, and a small pack. The day was mild, the sky clear, and the cliffs above glowed white in the sun. When he didn't return by evening, rangers checked with staff at Curry Village, who confirmed his plan to take the ledge trail. A quick search that night turned up nothing, and by morning a full-scale operation began. The search teams started at the base of the cliffs behind Curry Village, fanning out across the old trail corridor. It was treacherous ground, steep switchbacks cut into loose soil, with drop-offs that plunged hundreds of feet. In many places, the original trail had collapsed or been buried by rockfall. Rangers used ropes to explore narrow ledges and ravines. They called his name and looked for any sign of movement, footprints, a jacket, or a broken branch. The area was so rugged that progress was slow, and falling rocks made the climb even more dangerous. Helicopters were brought in after the second day to scan the cliffs from above, but the combination of shadows and dense tree cover made it impossible to see much of the terrain. The ledge trail's reputation for danger wasn't exaggerated. It's one of the steepest unmaintained routes in Yosemite, gaining more than 3,000 feet in just over 2 miles. It's also prone to disorientation. Once a hiker leaves the main track, they can quickly lose sight of the landmarks below. The cliffs look similar from every angle, and a few steps off trail can lead into dead ends or sheer drops. Rangers noted that a person who strayed even slightly could find themselves trapped on an isolated ledge, unable to climb up or down. The search lasted nearly a week. Teams covered every known section of the ledge trail, along with connecting drainages that could have diverted a lost hiker. They descended into gullies filled with fallen trees and boulders. They rappelled into ravines where runoff carved deep channels into the granite. Each day they found nothing. No footprints, no discarded gear, no torn clothing. The weather held steady throughout the search, but the cliffs remained hazardous. Loose gravel gave way underfoot, and several rescuers had to be pulled up by ropes after sliding toward drop-offs. By the 4th day, the park closed sections of the area to tourists for safety reasons. Helicopter pilots flying over the valley floor reported seeing fresh rock slides near the ledge trail, likely triggered by spring thaw and vibration from the search efforts. As days passed, hope of finding Walter alive began to fade. The park extended the search to nearby routes, the base of Glacier Point, the connecting ridge toward Illilouette Creek, and the descent paths into Tenaya Canyon. The terrain there is among the most treacherous in Yosemite, filled with hidden crevices, slippery granite domes, and sudden drop-offs that disappear into forested shadows. Rescuers described the experience as working inside a maze of cliffs. Sound carried oddly, echoing off the walls so that shouts for Walter often came back distorted. The team occasionally thought they heard a response, but when they followed the echo, there was nothing. By the 7th day, rangers concluded that if he had fallen from one of the higher ledges, his body could have landed in a part of the canyon nearly impossible to reach without specialized equipment. Years later, hikers occasionally reported finding fragments of old climbing gear or scraps of fabric near the same route, but none were ever linked to Walter. The National Park Service still lists him as missing, his name among the earliest recorded disappearances in Yosemite's modern history. Standing at the base of the ledge trail today, it's not hard to understand how someone could vanish there. The cliffs rise almost vertically, with narrow chutes of rubble between them. Trees cling to the rock face, their roots twisted around stone. Even the faint remnants of the old path disappear within a few hundred yards, swallowed by brush and loose debris. The sound of the river below fades as you climb, replaced by wind and the low hum of insects. The higher you go, the quieter it becomes. That was the route Walter Gordon chose on that spring morning in 1954. A quiet trail behind Curry Village, the granite above glinting in the sun, and a climb that promised one of the best views in Yosemite. Somewhere along that steep ascent the trail ended, and he did not return. Orvar von Laas, 1954. The Ahwahnee Hotel, with its towering stone facade and polished wood interiors, stood quiet on the morning of July 23, 1954. The summer season was in full swing. Tourists arriving from all over California, cars parked neatly outside, the sound of luggage wheels echoing through the lobby. Among the guests was Orvar von Laas, a 25-year-old man from Santa Barbara. He had checked in days earlier, travelling alone. By all accounts, he seemed calm and polite, spending time in the hotel's lounge and dining room, reading and occasionally walking the grounds. Then, one afternoon, he left the hotel and never returned. Staff remembered seeing him that morning, dressed casually and carrying a small day pack. He didn't check out, didn't settle his room, and left his main luggage behind. No one saw which direction he went. Some thought he might have been headed toward the Mirror Lake Trail, just a short walk from the Ahwahnee. Others suggested he was planning a quiet day hike along the valley floor. When he didn't return that evening, the hotel staff noted the absence but assumed he'd stayed out late or joined another group. By the following morning, his bed was still untouched, and his room key remained missing. When rangers were notified, they started with the paper trail, the documentation of his stay. Orvar had checked in under his own name, with accurate identification. He had paid for several nights in advance and had not expressed any plans to leave early. His car was still parked outside the hotel. The registration records gave no hint of a planned departure or a destination beyond Yosemite Valley. From that point, the investigation shifted from paperwork to ground search. The Ahwahnee Hotel sits at the eastern end of Yosemite Valley, surrounded by trails leading in every direction. North toward Mirror Lake, west toward the Merced River, and south toward the cliffs of Glacier Point. Rangers had to consider every possible route. Search teams began moving out from the hotel grounds, following the main trails where he could have gone for a walk or short hike. They checked rest areas, picnic sites, and shuttle stops. No one reported seeing him after his last confirmed sighting inside the hotel. Within 24 hours, the search expanded. Helicopters flew over the valley floor, and teams combed the forests near the river. The weather was warm, skies clear, and visibility good. Yet no trace of Orvar was found, no clothing, no footprints, no pack, and no witnesses. It was as if he'd stepped into the woods and disappeared between 1 hour and the next. The missing person report described him as 6 feet tall, athletic build, blonde hair, wearing light slacks and a grey shirt. Rangers distributed his photograph to other campgrounds and nearby hotels, but no one recognised him. His vehicle remained locked and untouched. His wallet, watch, and personal papers were inside his room. The paper trail became the backbone of the search. Rangers traced every possible record: purchases, phone calls, guest logs, even the mail desk. They checked with the park entrance stations to see if anyone matching his description had left the park on foot or by hitchhiking. None had. His name appeared nowhere on bus manifests or gas station receipts in the nearby towns. By the third day, searchers began to suspect he'd gone hiking alone, perhaps up the Snow Creek Trail or toward North Dome, both routes that begin within walking distance of the Ahwahnee. These trails climb steeply into the mountains and can become disorienting after a few miles, especially in the heat of the afternoon. Still, no one recalled passing him on the path, and there were no reports of distress calls or abandoned equipment. Rangers noted that 1954 had been a year of particularly high runoff and fast-moving creeks. The Merced River, even near the valley floor, was swollen from snowmelt. Several sections of trail were muddy or partially flooded, and the rock surfaces near the falls were slick with mist. A simple slip near a creek or along a granite ledge could easily become fatal, and a person could vanish from sight in seconds. Helicopters surveyed the base of Yosemite Falls, Royal Arches, and the wooded slopes near Tenaya Creek, where search dogs later picked up faint traces of scent that quickly vanished in the shifting wind. Nothing more came of it. The forest in that part of the valley is dense, with tall pines and deep undergrowth, and even experienced trackers can lose direction. Days stretched into a week. Each morning, rangers met at the Ahwahnee to plan new routes and cross-reference old ones. Each evening they returned with nothing. The hotel room remained sealed for investigation. Inside were folded clothes, a half-finished letter on the writing desk, and a pair of shoes neatly placed beside the bed. The scene gave no indication of a man intending to vanish or start over elsewhere. When the official search ended, Orvar von Lars's name joined the list of Yosemite's unsolved disappearances. His case is unusual because there was no wilderness permit, no backcountry route, and no clear reason. He disappeared not from the mountains or remote trails, but from one of the most populated and visible places in the park, a grand hotel in the heart of Yosemite Valley. Standing outside the Ahwahnee today, the same cliffs rise around it, and the same trails spread outward into the trees. The building still feels enclosed by wilderness. One step beyond the lawn and the forest swallows sound. Somewhere beyond those walls, Orvar von Lars walked out one morning into the valley's calm light and never came back. The record shows only a name, a date, and a room number. The last pieces of a paper trail that ends just a few steps beyond the hotel doors. Malcolm McClintock, 1948. The spring of 1948 had turned Yosemite National Park into a place of contrast. Snow still lingered in the shadows, but the meadows were already green. Water poured from every ridge, filling the air with the echo of distant falls. On June 13th, a 21-year-old student named Malcolm McClintock set out from his camp near the valley with a simple plan: to explore the Glacier Point area, one of the park's most famous overlooks. It was a clear Sunday morning, and the view from the valley floor stretched endlessly upward toward granite and cloud. He told friends he'd be back by evening. He never returned. Glacier Point rises more than 3,000 feet above Yosemite Valley, offering one of the most commanding views in the Sierra Nevada. Even in 1948, it was a well-known destination, connected by a road but also accessible by trail. The 4-mile trail winds upward from the valley, climbing in switchbacks along the cliff wall until it reaches the top. It's a demanding hike, steep and exposed in sections, but for someone young and fit, it was a popular challenge. Witnesses last saw Malcolm that morning near the start of the trail, carrying a small pack and wearing hiking boots. He appeared relaxed, confident, and prepared for a routine day hike. The sky was bright blue, and the air was cool enough to make climbing comfortable. Everything about the day seemed ordinary. By late afternoon, the light began to shift. When he hadn't returned by sunset, concern started to build among those who'd spoken to him that morning. The park was smaller and quieter then, communication slower, procedures less formal. By the next day, when his absence became undeniable, rangers launched a search. The terrain between the valley floor and Glacier Point is among Yosemite's most dramatic Amara. Sheer granite walls, steep ravines, and countless ledges that vanish into the forest below. The first teams followed the 4-mile trail, moving carefully through every switchback, scanning drop-offs and brush. They called his name into the echoing air. Nothing answered back but the wind moving through the canyon. By the third day, the search expanded. Rangers, volunteers, and even soldiers from a nearby base joined in. The road to Glacier Point had recently reopened for the season, and vehicles were used to shuttle teams between the top and bottom of the trail. From above, searchers looked down into the cliffs and chasms where a hiker could have fallen unseen. From below, teams climbed upward, covering each section of the path in grids. The challenges were immediate. The cliffs along that route rise almost vertically, with narrow shelves and loose rock. A person who slips can fall hundreds of feet before stopping. In 1948, there were no guardrails, and the edges were often covered in gravel. Even experienced hikers could lose footing when the afternoon sun warmed the granite, causing dust and small stones to slide. Rangers noted that a fall in many of those areas would send someone into inaccessible ravines, where recovery would be nearly impossible. Helicopters were not yet in regular use for search operations, so the effort relied on ground teams, binoculars, and rope. Rangers rappelled into gullies, scouted under ledges, and examined every drainage leading away from the trail. Each night they returned to camp exhausted, reporting no sign of footprints, no clothing, no broken branches. The only evidence of the day's passage was the sound of distant waterfalls and the fading light. The higher the teams climbed, the more rugged the terrain became. The Glacier Point apron, a vast sloping section of granite, is notorious for its smooth, unforgiving surface. Even dry, it feels slick. When mist or runoff crosses it, it becomes nearly impossible to walk without slipping. Searchers believed that if Malcolm had wandered even slightly off the main trail, he could have found himself on such a surface, unable to climb back or stop a slide. At the same time, the park's rivers ran high from snowmelt. Below the cliffs, Bridal Veil Creek and its tributaries surged with icy runoff. If he'd fallen into one of those channels, the water could have carried him far downstream before anyone knew he was missing. Divers checked pools where debris collected, but the currents were too strong to explore deeply. By the end of the first week, more than 100 people had joined the search. They combed through dense forest near Union Point and scouted beneath the overhangs where water dripped from the cliffs. The heat of the day alternated with freezing nights, creating fatigue and disorientation even among rescuers. Each new morning began with the same plan: retrace the trails, check the ravines, expand outward, but each night ended with the same silence. The National Park Service listed his disappearance as one of the earliest major missing person cases in Yosemite's post-war history. Unlike later incidents where weather or river conditions left clear explanations, Malcolm's case yielded nothing. No equipment, no trace of descent, no article of clothing left behind. The record ends with his last confirmed sighting: a young man walking toward the base of Glacier Point, sunlight flashing off the granite walls above him. Even now, standing along that trail, it's easy to feel the same pull he must have felt. The view widening with every step, the sense of elevation, the silence that deepens as the valley drops away below. The path narrows through switchbacks, and the cliffs seem endless. The rock warms under the sun, and beyond one of those turns, somewhere along the granite face between valley and sky, Malcolm McClintock took his final steps into the landscape and was never seen again. Patricia Patty Hicks disappeared in 1982, remains located 1983 and 1988, Summit Meadow, Jane Doe. Soft summer light filtered through the pine and birch trees of the high meadow known as Summit Meadow in Yosemite National Park, casting long shadows across the glade. In daylight it looks peaceful: wildflowers, shaded granite slabs, a faint trail winding through tall grass. In June 1983, a family visiting the meadow discovered a severed arm and hand resting on a rock beside the clearing. The remains, later joined by a skull in 1988, became the case of the Summit Meadow Jane Doe. Years passed, no name, no cause. Then, decades later, forensic science spoke. The Jane Doe was identified as Patricia Patty Hicks. Her disappearance, the remains found, the unanswered questions, all came together under the headings Unidentified and Forensics and Echoes and Evidence. Patricia Marie Hicks was born June 1, 1954. She disappeared around September 1982 after relocating to Merced, California. Her family lost contact. In June 1983, only months later, the arm and hand appeared in Yosemite. The forensic team concluded the remains likely belonged to a female in her late 20s. The skull, found near the same site in 1988, matched the arm via later DNA testing. But for decades, no name. Just Jane Doe, Summit Meadow. The park's missing person files held the unusual case. Entry in the missing list. No clothing tag, no backpack. A woman vanished, a body unknown. In the early 2020s, forensic genealogy reopened the case. DNA extracted from the remains was used to build a family tree. Eventually matches narrowed and the identity of the woman emerged as Patty Hicks. The National Park Service announced the match publicly, giving the Jane Doe her name after nearly 40 years. With the name came fresh questions. Why was she in Yosemite? How did she arrive? What happened at Summit Meadow? The case shifted from unidentified to cold homicide investigation, though no charges were ever filed. Now the echoes and evidence fill the space between disappearance and discovery. One thread: Patty's life before Yosemite. After her brother's suicide, she experienced trauma, changed career, and became involved with a group in Merced known as the Sananda Apostolic Church. A friend would later say that in 1982 Patty got on a bus to Yosemite with no fixed destination, leaving Merced and the group behind. The last confirmed contact with her family was a photograph sent in September 1982. After that, silence. Another thread: what the remains tell us. The arm and hand discovered at Summit Meadow show decomposition consistent with being outdoors for 12-18 months. Animal scavenging present. No clothing or personal effects preserved. The skull later uncovered lacked a jawbone and was found in a shallow grave near the same slab of granite. Forensic anthropology estimated the age and build of the victim, and the location in the remote glade suggested someone travelled into backcountry terrain and was not immediately routed by trail. Investigators also compiled statements and records of known visitors in the area during the early 1980s. One man, Henry Lee Lucas, a serial killer who confessed to many murders, claimed he picked up a young female hitchhiker between Fresno and Yosemite, said they drank beer and had consensual sex, and that he strangled her near Yosemite thereafter. Investigators found beer cans and chicken bones at the scene that matched Lucas's statement, yet ruled his confession inconsistent and lacking in verifiable detail. Lucas could not recall Yosemite's name, and his story included contradictory elements. Still, he remains among the few linked to the location. Another possible link, the earlier life of Patricia Hicks in Merced. Her association with the cult leader Donald Eugene Gibson, the court case in 1981, and her departure for Yosemite shortly thereafter. Some former cult members believe Gibson may have played a role in her disappearance, yet no physical evidence connects him or anyone else to what happened at Summit Meadow. The pattern of evidence, a departure from everyday life, a remote discovery of remains in Yosemite far from roads or trails, identification by modern DNA decades later, ongoing unanswered questions about cause, time and perpetrator. The terrain itself offered the final hiding place. Summit Meadow sits along old high country trails, accessible only by foot. Its remoteness means that a body or parts could remain undetected for years. The forest reclaims footprints, rock slides obscure ledges, deer trails replace human tracks, precipitation washes away scent and trace. For decades, hikers passed through Summit Meadow unaware of the secret beneath the ground. The air looked clean, the view open, the silence unchanged. Yet for one night, for one set of steps, the wilderness concealed more than it revealed. Then decades later, forensic science arrived, handed a name to that silhouette. The echo of her life now resonates in the records, while the evidence still lies where it was found, arm and skull pinned between rock and tree under long shadows of granite slabs and silent pines. The case of Patricia "Patty" Hicks links the individual human story to the wild physics of Yosemite's backcountry. Rocky terrain, hidden trails, low visitor frequency, difficult search conditions. It connects the movement of a vulnerable young woman into a setting where recovery is hard, clues vanish fast, and time stretches without answer. And while we now know who she was, much about how she came to that meadow and what happened there remains part of the wilderness she entered. F.P. Shepard, 1909. The summer of 1909 in Yosemite Valley felt like a turning point. The park was still young, the trail still rough, and visitors few enough that each name recorded by the rangers could be remembered. Horse-drawn carriages carried guests to Glacier Point, and long hikes between scenic overlooks were still considered a test of endurance rather than recreation. It was in that setting, on July 11, 1909, that a visitor named F.P. Shepard left for what should have been a simple day's outing. A walk between Glacier Point and Sentinel Dome, two of the most accessible and well-known viewpoints in Yosemite. He never came back. The route between the 2 points is short, less than 2 miles along the ridge of Yosemite Valley's south rim. Even then, it was clearly marked, and travellers often took it to see both the panoramic view from Glacier Point and the sweeping elevation from Sentinel Dome. The path is gentle, rising only a few hundred feet, passing through open forest and granite outcrops. On paper, it was one of the safest and most manageable walks in the park. Shepard, whose full name is rarely recorded in historical accounts, was a middle-aged man visiting Yosemite on his own. He was staying at one of the small camps near Glacier Point, which at the time was little more than a rustic lodge with cabins and tents. On that morning, he told another guest that he planned to hike over to Sentinel Dome to take in the view, possibly sketch or photograph the landscape, and return before dinner. He was last seen leaving Glacier Point shortly after noon. When the dinner bell rang and he hadn't come back, no one thought much of it at first. Hikers often lingered for sunset or took detours to watch the valley from the cliffs. But by the next morning, the lodge staff grew uneasy. His bed was untouched, his belongings still inside the cabin, and there was no sign of him along the trail. A small search began immediately, one of the earliest recorded missing person efforts in Yosemite's history. In 1909, search and rescue was rudimentary. There were no helicopters, no radios, and only a few rangers on patrol. The initial effort relied on mule teams and local guides familiar with the terrain. The trail from Glacier Point to Sentinel Dome was walked in both directions several times. The searchers called his name and scanned the cliffs below for movement. But in this landscape, a wrong step can be final. The rim of the valley drops abruptly thousands of feet down to the floor below. There are no barriers, and even a moment's distraction can lead to a fall that no one hears. The record describes the weather that week as clear and calm. That meant visibility was perfect, and that made his disappearance even harder to understand. A fall from the cliffs would normally leave obvious signs: disturbed soil, broken brush, or loose rock. But the searchers found none of that. The trail itself was easy to follow, with few forks. They widened their search to include the nearby Taft Point and Washburn Point areas, scanning every possible ridge or drainage. Still nothing. When days passed with no clue, newspapers picked up the story. The San Francisco Call and other early California papers published brief notes. Man missing in Yosemite Park, searchers baffled. Tourists at Glacier Point spoke of the strange quiet along the trail, where every step echoed off the granite walls. The sense of mystery deepened when even a careful sweep of the valley floor below, 1,000 feet down, revealed no trace of a fall. The terrain between Sentinel Dome and Glacier Point can be misleading. From above, it appears open and gentle, but the forest conceals narrow fissures and steep cracks in the granite. Many of these fissures are only a few feet wide but can drop dozens of feet straight down. A hiker who slips into one may be completely hidden from view, even by searchers standing a few yards away. In 1909, these features were unmapped and largely unknown except to experienced mountaineers. Some rangers later suggested that Shepard may have stepped off the trail to explore or take a shortcut and fallen into one of these hidden crevices. Others believed he may have continued past Sentinel Dome and lost his bearings in the descending forest toward Bridalveil Creek, where the terrain becomes rougher and disorienting. The combination of similar-looking granite domes, patchy forest, and a lack of trail markers could easily confuse a lone traveller, especially without water or compass. Once off the ridge, returning to Glacier Point would have been difficult. The official search lasted nearly 2 weeks. Rangers, local guides, and even a few soldiers from the nearby Presidio assisted. They found no remains, no clothing, no gear, no scrap of paper to indicate where he'd gone. His disappearance was eventually recorded in the park's early logbooks as missing F.P. Shepard between Glacier Point and Sentinel Dome, July 1909. It was a case that lingered in ranger discussions for years afterward. Later patrols along the trail occasionally came across weathered objects, a piece of cloth, a hat brim, a shoe sole, but none could be conclusively tied to him. Each discovery sparked a brief reopening of the question, followed by silence once more. The forest and granite gave nothing back. Today, hikers still walk that same path. The route from Glacier Point to Sentinel Dome is marked and busy, with families and photographers stopping for views of Half Dome and Yosemite Falls. Yet just a few steps off trail, the same steep gullies and rock fissures remain, unchanged from that summer of 1909. Standing at the rim, you can look out over the same endless drop of granite and air, where the light shifts against the valley and the sound of the wind replaces everything else. Somewhere along that stretch between two of Yosemite's most famous landmarks, F.P. Shepard took a final walk into the high country and disappeared from history. Yosemite keeps its secrets. Trails fade, rivers change, and the forest grows over what was lost. The names remain, but the answers stay hidden among the cliffs and valleys, waiting, quiet and still part of the mountain itself.